you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 7th part of What If Deku Finds dannyphantom in MHA. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of RusEmp on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. However, it served as a fuel for further thought, not just to the potential hirers, who had already scribbled down plenty, or the already shocked audience, but also to the less savory individuals, who resided in their own secluded habitats. You heard him, didn't you, Garaki? All for one left, so we discover that the boy doesn't simply take. He is also capable of bestowing power to others, finished a short moustached man in a lab coat. Not simply bestowing. The kingpin raised his finger with a grin on his face. He didn't give her telekinesis, correct. To what limit does this beguiling power go, I wonder? This does feel like a next step in the evolution of your quirk, master. I see now what you meant. Hardly an eye-opener for you, is it, dear friend? Ever so eager to see the substantiation of your theories. Todoroki was old enough to see the confirmations all around himself, and within his master also. He had no need in confirming it further. The ever-present mixing of quirks was bound to create a highly combustible substance that would doom them all. Even now his masters was starting to have difficulties holding so many new quirks, reluctant as the latter was to admit this. But to someone who was well versed in the field, like Kyudai, the boy's power seemed odd. The girl seems to be taking the augmentation in stride. I'm surprised the fools around are taking kindly to this, too. They are bewitched by the spectacle, is all. Once the dust settles, they will show the expected Caligula-grade paranoia, all for one chuckled. He himself had no interest in anyone but the two students, the one who could be his progeny and, by irony, the one whom he suspected to be the next incarnation and embodiment of what he was fighting against for decades. The girl was irrelevant. I also meant that she doesn't show any signs of strain. Usually when someone's power increases to such an extent, bodies just break. Like a twig, the villain added. So many abnormalities, little Daniel. Todoroki had not been in the room for long, and it was his first time hearing the first name of their object of observation. However, it provoked a chain of thoughts that seemed to somewhat click. It is his name, correct? Todoroki asked. What? All for one lazily asked. Ah, yes, it is, from what I see. For a usual Western name, it seems to concern you a lot. It's just that person we apprehended snooping around our base. You know, we keep him unconscious with electric charges, because it's all that seemed to work. But he mumbles in his sleep, I heard it. And the name Danny keeps popping up way too often. If the villain's eyes were still intact, they would have gone wide from surprise at a sudden fortune that came their way. What an interesting coincidence. Is there a chance we can interrogate him for more? I won't advise waking the furball up. Those ridiculously sharp and large claws are not for show. He cut apart one of my nomus and the wounds would not heal. Had to rid of that piece of useless lump meat. And apparently, that wolf could make portals. Barely had the time to knock him out before he jumped in. Yes, I know that part. And it couldn't be Daniel's doing, for he attained that very power after we caught that canine visitor. So you have to understand that we can't possibly contain him if he wakes up. I cut off one of his claws for research, and it's unlike anything I've seen. He also grew another back the next day, so I don't think he even noticed it's gone. I'll be there when he does wake up, so you don't have to worry. I'm positively intrigued by the conundrum of our boy Wonder and his entourage. It is great shame that the potential mothers of are all dead or gone with no trace. I could learn more this way, but none of them had the quirks that could alter yours and pass it on. So it must have changed on its own. Has Kurogiri brought any more valuable information on him? He is a child that emerged out of nowhere in all the official documents. An American with an American name, and yet with impeccable Japanese from the seams. And I have too much faith in the governments when it comes to keeping individuals with powerful quirks in check nowadays. To miss something like him, someone must have wanted a clean slate, all for one said. Between this and his intriguing hobby that he so unfortunately discarded ever since Tamura's daring little scheme, I'm slowly gaining hope that the boy may be amicable to the possible revelation. Perhaps he already knows everything. The villain in turn laughed. If this is your way of gaining my attention, child, you have certainly succeeded. Garaki was still uncertain about how he should feel about that sudden excitement of his master. It wasn't scientific wonder like his own curiosity. All for one wanted something to come out of this, whether to get the prodigal son on his side or to simply take what looked like an alluring prize. Garaki could not yet fathom. But for now, waiting is what he was relegated to. Oh, and watching over a metaphorical bomb in his lab. I believe I should return to my work, master. Certainly, I wouldn't want to distract you anymore. Despite the sense of guilt that suddenly emerged in Danny's stomach, he could deem the impromptu experiment a success. Ectoplasm seemed to mash well enough with Yanagi's quirk. He knew from experience that doing that to a normal human was much more dangerous. His whole school once got infected with a special ectoplasm-based virus. It did grant them a power or two, but it was slowly eating them apart. Thankfully, he resolved the matter before anyone sustained grave injuries. Yanaga's body seemed to have a relative immunity, even without a core. Soon, before the next match could start, Mina returned, looking awfully chill for someone who just lost an important match. Hey, Mina, Danny chuckled nervously. No hard feelings. PFFT, she huffed. Of course not. But man, I had no chance, had I. Don't say that. Danny's muffled moan was heard through the palms covering his face. Yeah, you did awesome. Kirishima gave a thumbs up. Given the situation, he added and got a light slap across the back of his head from the pink girl. Just let's watch the next matches, okay? Danny offered weakly. Later, seeing Yanagi return to her joyous classmates and give him a small smile, his consciousness decided to loosen its grip. But it was still a half-assed consolation. The subsequent fights maintained the high standards of entertainment. The audience was kept excited for each match that followed, for there was evidently always something to be surprised about. It was correct that their powers were very much well known by that point, but it is their inventive uses that actually mattered. It was thanks to skill in combat that Tokoyami triumphed over Yaoyorozu, and it was because of that inventiveness that Uraraka managed to stand as long as she did against the unstoppable force Bakugou represented. The latter's display earned him the scorn from the audience, because for the most part it wasn't a fight, it was a beatdown. Fenton didn't like it either, for he knew that Ochako did nothing to deserve such beating other than being a threat. However, that point of view was born due to his own personal sympathies. He suspected this, so he kept quiet mostly. His own thoughts were loudly voiced by Aizawa. It was true that Bakugou was going hard against Uraraka because he recognized that for all her innocent looks it was still a fight. Danny didn't agree with Aizawa relegating the fierceness purely to the desire to win. Fenton thought of Bakugou as an asshole, and he wasn't going to believe that it wasn't also him being a bastard. Danny was also reminded that on the way to the top those two would most likely cross paths for the first actual time. And knowing Bakugou, he would give it his all to best someone who teased him about being inferior. And after seeing the unpleasant-looking fight, Danny decided to remind the blonde as to why that teasing took place at all. Before the next round would start, however, a tiebreaker in the form of an arm wrestling match would take place. Kirishima and Tetsu had turned out to be an equal match, and no winner had emerged from their fight. Unsurprising, considering how similar the two's quirks were. Danny made sure to overcompensate for the previous lack of support, and root for his friend perhaps too hard. Teach that metalhead a lesson, red. Danny shouted loudly, earning himself confused looks. Everyone but Mina's. She was into this. You can do it, Kirishima-kun. The two strongmen wrestled for nearly 10 minutes, with the platform beneath their elbows barely standing. But finally, with a final roar, Kirishima pushed down the opponent's hand, making the crowd explode in applause. Kirishima moved to the next round, much to the joy of his classmates and friends that rooted for him. And then there was a fight between Midoriya and Todoroki. Expectations differed on who you would ask, as was always the case. Midoriya was a glass cannon. As smart as he was, his choices were limited. Danny remembered why he had almost lost the first prelim and first place in the race to him, and it was him capable of using the quirk without damaging himself. However, it was a momentary success, one that he had no guarantee of repeating. Shinso lost because he was not a fighter, but now, going against the student who was among the strongest, Midoriya's chances weren't as big. One from Class 1 would also remember that it was Todoroki who had challenged Midoriya for a reason probably known only to them. And that meant not going easy on their opponent. Was it too early for the culmination of their newfound rivalry? Whatever the answer could be, fate had forced its decision down everyone's throats. The battle looked painful. It was painful, for neither side wished to relent, to allow a breather. Todoroki had had his hopes of winning it like he always did by freezing all around him before the enemy could oppose him. Unfortunately, Midoriya had come up with a way to counteract his main weakness, or, at the very least, delay it. A single finger at a time, a conduit strong enough to break any barrage of ice, but was only buying time. Everyone had seen Todoroki's capacity. 10 strikes, 1 for each finger broken, was far from it. Midoriya was evidently contemplating his strategy, for the current one wasn't going to last him for long. And all along, he and Todoroki were saying something to each other, something that couldn't be heard over the deafening noise of the shattering ice. But Todoroki wasn't just a powerful quirk. He was also the brains. He managed to catch Midoriya when he tried to evade the strike instead of meeting it head-on. And then the green-haired teen had nothing else to do but to use his entire hand. Todoroki was caught unprepared, barely able to summon the wall that stopped him from falling out of grounds, so powerful the punch was. And yet, the result was evident to all, as every viewer could witness the absolutely ruined, purple arm that was in a horrid pain. Both their respective states were looking grim, enough to cause a stir among the crowds, and doubts among the two judges. Perhaps the battle had to be stopped before they killed each other, for something snapped in Todoroki's head. For better or worse, for what reason, only the two knew at the moment, but his second half was engulfed in fire that ate part of the arena in another attempt at besting the opponent. The people were shocked to learn only now had the teen used that part of his quirk, although it made sense for a son of the flame hero to be capable of the feat. Danny was surprised to see this, and also unpleasantly surprised. Fire was his second most hated thing to be hit by. But the atmosphere was growing tense, for if something so well hidden was being used, the two must have really been going all out. Before they could unleash their entire arsenal at a point-blank range, Cementos tried to summon several walls between them. And yet, the combined force of Midoriya's smashing attack and the concentrated inferno was enough to make the cement barriers bend like cardboards and crumble like glass, with a powerful explosion that made everyone instinctively take cover behind the seat in front. The arena was ruined, and when the smoke cleared, the audience bore witness to Todoroki in his burnt-off shirt, and Izuku, who collapsed outside of the ring. The undisputed winner of the match was the one who, albeit temporarily, renounced his shackles. And to the great shame, only he and Midoriya knew how much it meant. That was, Nina mumbled. Quite flashy, Danny spoke slowly, as in, holy shit, what just happened? He asked in genuine astonishment. Look at Izuku, gasped Uraraka, who herself wore several bandages, a parting gift from Bakugou. He looks very bad, finished Ida and jumped from his seat. We must see him immediately. That was the course of action Midoriya's closer friends took. Danny threw another grim glance at Midoriya's downed and bruised figure, which was immediately taken to the nurse office. Empathy emerged, an unexpected visitor in the heart of someone who himself was in that exact position more times than he dared to count. I guess it is a good thing he didn't win, Danny spoke to the classmates around him. This looks beyond what recovery girl can fix easily. Yeah, guess you're right, Kirishima nodded. They both were so manly, though. Yep, the Hafo leaned back in his seat. Props to them for setting the bar, he said. Indeed, Takoyami nodded. People will come to expect the same determination and strength of character from all of us. This is why I am looking forward to the match between us, Fenton-san. Same deal here, pal. Same deal, Danny mumbled and slowly got up. I guess I'll check on the poor guy, too. Not like the next match is gonna start like this. Mina pointed at the destruction the fight had left. Next in line, a battle between Ida and Yanagi. The former had been preparing mentally, for he had need to wash away the humiliation he experienced in the last match. He suspected that by the time of her first confrontation, Yanagi was still getting accustomed to what Fenton had given her. However, he had no reason to doubt that this time the girl would want to take him out quickly. Ida was not the one who specialized in ranged combat. Yanagi had observed that much. There weren't any projectiles to use against the enemy, so there was only one thing the poltergeist girl could do. Ah, and it starts. Present Mike exclaimed. Ida lunged forward without delay. He had to act fast, but also without using his calf engines. Momentum could be both his ally and the enemy. He had to be watchful. Yanagi raised her hands and concentrated, her sleepy eyes not diverting from the bespectacled teen. In the next second, she moved away from his direct path, and Ida felt and saw the grasp of telekinetic power, the one that pushed him even further, something Ida had foreseen. But Yanagi made a mistake of letting go after tossing the opponent out of bounds. Before even beginning to fall, Ida turned to face Yanagi. Next second, he unleashed the pent-up combustive energy of Recipro Burst. Like a jet engine, it propelled him forward and towards his opponent. Yanagi's surprise broke the so much needed concentration, prevented her from reacting in full. She managed to slow him down, but not stop outright. The power of the engine overpowered the telekinetic pull and finally Ida rammed into the girl's smaller frame. The force of the push was enough to send Yanagi flying backwards, and, with how short the distance to the boundaries was, out of said bounds. Yanagi is out of bounds. Present mic confirmed. The victory goes to Ida. When the opponent gets close and personal, her main weakness is revealed, Danny commented. But she is nearly invincible at a long range, Midoriya scribbled down. Min-maxing us is, added Mina. Yanagi stood up, dusting the dirt from her gym uniform. Her expression was as emotionless as ever, not letting her frustration that was present there show. She got too overconfident too quickly, and her defeat was just as swift. That was no way for her to go out, yet here she was. But once again, the internecine debate did not make its way out. Yanagi humbly decided that she would not let something like that happen again and would come up with some more sophisticated uses of her quirk. But for now, she had to accept her defeat. Danny stretched his muscles in preparation for the next match. Takoyami was no pushover. He was rightfully considered one of the strongest students of 1A. And with the ectoplasmic nature of his quirk, he had the means of at least combating the most bothersome power of the half-ghosts. Intangibility was not as utile anymore, but that also meant that Phantom 2 had experience and countermeasures against Takoyami's alter ego given shape. Companion, the nature of that bond remained to be seen. Now, however, they stood at the opposing ends of the arena, about to fight for the right to pass to the semi-finals. Fenton-san, Takoyami spoke with all seriousness. When you said you saw shadows like mine before, I was being genuine, responded Danny, assuming battle stance. Johnny's is less of a threat, though. The only thing it's good for is pinning you as a bad omen. And when the bell rang, Phantom was in no hurry to switch into his ghost form. His blue eyes gleamed with the same mischievous glow, the same mischievousness you would expect from him no matter what foe he was facing. Without delay he swiped his hands and fired a blue beam that coated the ground in front of him in a layer of ice, creeping closer to Takoyami. The feathered hero trainee assaulted the opponent with the ferocious shadow from the get-go. The shadow dodged the ice ray, got closer, raised its arm to block the ray from finally hitting the opponent directly and lunged. Danny smirked, and before the shadow could get him, he slid down across the line of ice he had created, trying to blast the shadow's underbelly. However, the scorching ectoplasm only scratched the quick and nimble creature. Phantom's intention was to get closer to Takoyami himself and down him with a strong punch. The Raven boy was no fool himself. He knew his weakness. When Danny reached the end of his slope and pushed himself to his legs in a swift motion, the shadow was already before him. The hit was absorbed by the quirk manifestation, which he could swear was smirking. Found a way to your heart, Danny kept grinning, too, before from the inside the shadow felt an intense burning. Light and alien ectoplasm hurt it equally. Shadow, get him away, Takoyami commanded. The creature swung its huge arm and hit the Haffa. Phantom's human body was launched to the side, but he managed to land on his feet and summon a shield against the next attack. The barrier stood firm, but the agile shadow went around it. But Phantom greeted it with an ectoplasm-engulfed fist with a lightning speed. The shadow blocked the strike, but was sent reeling backwards, into the still-present shield, that instantly blew up into a mess of light and otherworldly lasers. The screeching shadow retreated back to Takoyami at the latter's silent order, giving Fenton some room that wasn't near the very edge. Fenton manages to stand his ground. Present Mike commented, even when not in his ghost form he is still a formidable force. Takoyami knew this already. He knew not what Fenton's reasoning for allowing a handicap were. But this was not a reason to underestimate his enemy. He was probing the Haffa's defenses, and Fenton gave him a demonstration. Whatever shape his energy took, he could use it to bash the attacking enemy. Takoyami had been searching for a possible weakness in his defense, but so far only lighting had proven its worth, and it was something he did not possess. Takoyami, I am getting a bad feeling from this. The shadow spoke to him in panic. We will do this, the student responded to the creature humbled by light exposure. Huh, so he actually talks, commented Danny. That's nice to know. Not a moment too soon, from his eyes emerged another beam of energy, which Takoyami managed to dodge at the last moment. Fenton kept barraging him with a stream of green blasts, cutting off possible ways of retreating, as he so obviously fired in advance, expecting Takoyami to run into one of them. It was like a game of dodgeball, ripe with special effects. Nonetheless, the teen quickly realized that dodging would get him nowhere. The only way to get in close proximity was to give Fenton what he wanted. Instead of sending Shadow forward, he himself was closing the distance alongside it. The Haffa seemed to have taken the bait, and the fighting arena was no longer a mere shooting range for him. Instead, he let his ice power take over before he ran towards Takoyami as well. Before they could enter close combat, Danny fired an ice beam right at Tokoyami's legs, but managed to freeze only one leg. Fenton was about to hit the teen, but once again the shadow blocked his offensive, took the hit and held the ground. With Fenton's human form, and with him not putting ectoplasm into his strikes that time, they were more than a match physically. Tokoyami in the meantime tried to get his leg out of the trap. The ice did not creep far up. With enough twitches he could get the leg out at the expense of his shoe, and the shadow knew it had to buy time. It went for a counterattack, which Danny blocked with his left arm, smirked and opened the palm and revealed another improvised flashbang. The shadow reeled in fright, but could not dodge the small explosion and was blasted away. "Ruffled your feathers, eh?" Phantom commented with a stupid grin. "About time we wrap this up, anyway." Tokoyami managed to get his leg out and barely had the time to dodge a punch from the ghost that seemed to never give him a breather. The shadow went to attack the Haffa once again, looking even smaller than before. Phantom did not stop his advance, raising his arm once more. "You stay down," he said, and blew up another ball of ectoplasm. The bright light again kept the creature away, leaving the owner defenseless. Tokoyami himself was much less of a fighter than his opponent. He couldn't hope to match, so he had to keep the distance. Fenton pushed himself forward, in order to cut off the retreat of his opponent. The shadow still went after him, guided more by the instinct of an animal pushed into a corner, buying time for the owner to concoct a proper plan. But Tokoyami could see that Fenton was not letting himself be distracted. Each time the shadow got close, it was blasted with light. Unlike the blasts, flashbangs were impossible to dodge. However, when Fenton was once again near Tokoyami, he suddenly vanished from sight, surprising his opponent who had been looking over his shoulder. Then, he felt like he ran into something, into a hand that gripped his neck, and whilst not choking, it was firm as dead man's. Fenton dropped the veil of invisibility, holding his another hand with a readied green glowing ball, daring the shadow to try. "I think we should call it a match," the Haffa said, his eyes now blazing with emerald light. "I give up," Tokoyami spoke in a defeated voice. Tokoyami surrenders. Fenton is the winner. Immediately Danny let go, allowing the raven teen to stand on the ground. "You did very good." His smirk became a good-natured smile. "But it is daytime, and I just knew what to do. Sometimes matchups are not perfect." "That's true," mumbled Tokoyami and nodded. "I hope that the ability to prevent your intangibility will suffice." Danny chuckled. "Well, that's why I'm a menace to society," he said, and followed Tokoyami out of bounds. After Kirishima's defeat at the hands of the local explosion enthusiast, everyone was glued to the screens soon after. After the short break dedicated to the usual maintenance, the semifinals were about to transpire. Nobody appeared surprised that the trio of high scorers, Fenton, Todoroki, and Bakugou, made it this far. Ida was not exactly the centerpiece of attention, aside from the initial humiliation he sustained at the hands of Hatsune. But he had performed outstandingly against Yanagi and was now this high up. That, and the heroic heritage of his family, which was a new piece of information for Danny, did garner him points, and he would be the first combatant of that round, alongside the wielder of fire and ice. And while the Haffa could feel the intense hatred practically radiating in waves from one particular blonde, he promptly chose to ignore him. Danny had anticipated that matchup in one way or another, so he already had a semblance of a plan. Sitting at the last moment and making last-second changes was not going to alter the result in any way. Was Phantom underestimating him? Well, he never doubted the power and a high degree of planning. And Bakugou was not stupid. He too knew exactly how the Haffa always chose to play. To invoke anger and irrationality when it could make all the difference. Bakugou was yet to convince Danny that a proper fit of anger was not going to throw all that out of the window. "What's your forecast, oh mighty class rep?" Mina asked dramatically. Danny hummed. "Well, dear friend," he played along with dramatics. "Ida meets his worst match to date. Todoroki can just freeze the whole ground and strip all mobility. Unless Ida dares it, of course. Still, my money is on Scarface. Why not freeze him instead? For that Todoroki-san will actually have to aim," commented Midoriya. "But Ida-san is too quick." Danny clicked his tongue. "Pretty much. If Ida manages to avoid ground as much as possible, it will be a more even field." "But he uses fire now, too, doesn't he, Kiro?" asked Sue. "I don't know if he will do it again," Midoriya admitted. "There's a reason he doesn't use it much." Danny raised an eyebrow. "And that reason is physical or mental?" The latter, the green-haired hero trainee, did not wish to divulge anything private. Phantom would have argued that it was pointless to run from your own power, but Todoroki was not there. And it would be hypocritical of him to say so, because Danny could throw electricity, too. And there was a reason he did not do that often. But for Danny it was one power out of many. In Shoto's case, it was the denial of an entire half of his being. Perhaps a more fitting analogy would be for Fenton to loathe his ghost part in its entirety. Danny looked at Midoriya, who had taken heavy damage while trying to break that shell of the usually reclusive classmate. It was rather selfless of him, reckless, as their homeroom teacher was undoubtedly thinking. But Danny could respect that effort, and perhaps, albeit inadvertently, help him with that in case Todoroki triumphed then. The forecast turned out to be accurate enough. Todoroki indeed attacked first. Without delay, he launched a line of ice that blocked the way to his right. Ida quickly reacted and ran another way, utilizing his engines. His opponent, however, swiftly blocked that way as well, trapping the bespectacled teen. Todoroki then attempted to capitalize with another freezing attack, but this time Ida avoided the strike with a standing long jump. While in midair, Ida activated his brand new Recipro Burst technique once more. It came as a no surprise for Todoroki, as he actually managed to duck the initial kick. However, Ida quickly lands and immediately follows up with a second powerful kick that slammed Shoto into the ground. It was a major surprise to the audience, and certainly an exciting one. Without hesitation, Ida followed this up by leaping over the downed opponent and grabbing the back of his shirt before sprinting towards the edge of the arena. Believing the remaining time of his engines that spurned out the powerful flames will be sufficient, he nonetheless understood how helpless he would be after such a daring act. When, all of a sudden, the engine stopped prematurely, and the teen came to a screeching halt. Upon looking down, Tenya immediately realized with horror that his mufflers had been frozen shut. In the end, Todoroki quickly froze the ground and grabbed Ada's arm as he encased most of his body in ice. It took the watchers some time to realize what happened. When did he even do that? Asked Kirishima, scratching his temple. Ida was careful not to let Todoroki touch him. He did it when Ada's boot was introduced to Todoroki's spine. Danny shrugged, scratching his cheek. It just took Ida some time to realize that it was only him running forward. Well, he leaned back in his seat. Guess now it's gonna be our turn, eh, Nummo? He left, he said with disappointment, not seeing Bakugou. The blonde boy in question was indeed anxious from anticipation. It was not an anxiety synonymous to fear, but rather the desire to finally face the extra that wanted to upstage him at every turn. The spook mocked him, never took him seriously, always residing on his throne above the rest. That rather skewed, but not entirely untrue image was still burned into the back of his head. Few would notice that Bakugou could recognize the effort put up against him, or anywhere near him, for that matter. Kirishima and Uraraka both were a tier above the absolute trash in his eyes. Granted, it did not concern the nerd, who always had that staple and it alone. And as for Fenton, the amount of said effort he displayed was absolutely insulting and irritating to no end. After all, Fenton met a proper match only against Nanwu so far, and even then the beast went down the second its main weakness was exposed. He wasn't really trying, and that infuriated Bakugou more than anything else. Occasionally, a thought was flashing through his head also, something he refused to accept. When he was watching Todoroki or Fenton, occasionally doubt rose in him. Doubt that he could not win in a fight against them. That foreign feeling was painful and impossible to accept. Yet, like an insect that wakes you in the morning, knowing that your groggy self would not rise to squash it, that thought was impossible to get rid of. That duel was bound to happen, and if so, Bakugou would expect to not lose to a half-hearted attempt. After a while of sitting around, and seeing the arena cleaned up soon, Danny finally rose from his seat. Well then, guess it's my cue, he said and went to leave. Break a leg, man. Kirishima called after him. Who's exactly? Danny asked sarcastically and exited. After 2 matches and occasional visit to the nurse, he found the way around with relative ease. However, as he went down the corridor, he heard an unmistakable shout directed right at him. Stop right there, spook. Danny turned around to face Bakugou. Can I help you? He grinned. So the game had already started. Its only rule was evident to both and simple to no end that the last straw in Bakugou's head had to snap. Within limits, of course. Danny didn't want to stoop so low and outright insult someone who, to be perfectly honest, did not deserve it. I know what you are trying to pull off, the blonde growled. Really? Well, what you planning to do about that? Asked Danny, putting a hand on his belt. I'm saying that it won't work, you extra bastard, Bakugou responded. Your sorry ass is not gonna win. Someone was being unintentionally vague. To the point it appeared like self-conditioning. But that wasn't the case obviously, it was a way to vent out some frustration, and to set forward a certain demand. You think that this stupid handicap is something noble, don't ya? Danny blinked. That wasn't exactly what he had expected. You mean why I don't turn into a ghost? I just wanted to let everyone shine, is all. So you do think that way? Bakugou exclaimed and hit the nearest wall with his hand, blowing it up in a small fiery cloud. Danny didn't flinch. Listen here, Spook, I want you to show what you can do. Geez, you sound like Aizawa. The halfer rubbed the back of his neck. Tell you what, number 2. Make me. Fury was evident on the blonde's face, but Danny ignored that and continued. If you manage to force me to that limit, then so be it. But I'm not playing along just because you tell me. We good? Bakugou did not respond, instead passing Phantom by, but not without nudging into the latter's shoulder. Suddenly, Danny began to chuckle. What you laughing about, Spook? I just realized that Midoriya isn't the only one asking to let go of reservations here. You compare me to that nerd. Danny rubbed his ear, leaning against the wall. Volume, please. If I remember correctly, you two were friends way back. No. Bakugou's fists clenched as he looked away. Shut up, Spook. Nobody asked your opinion. Well, I didn't ask you about how I should fight, Fenton retorted. But as you wish. I am not my sister to analyze your Midoriya. Who even cares about that nerd? The blonde exclaimed, storming away and making more random explosions. Apparently you do, Danny mumbled inaudibly, and not in a healthy way. Eventually the two made their way to the arena. Cementos mentally prepared himself to interfere, for the situation between the evidently rivaling students was bound to get heated. The impression was shared by many, but for varying reasons. The audience saw two powerful teenagers, one of whom was showing impressive ferociousness and prowess, and the other possessed overwhelming power. There they are. Present Mike announced. The class rep Fenton is going to face off against the explosive menace that is Bakugou. This is going to be a fiery experience, if you catch what I mean. He spoke with excitement and nudged his friend, who simply hummed in thought. He had his suspicion about the two clashing eventually, and it came true, for better or worse. Bakugou was out for blood after all the poking Fenton had done. And as much as the Halfa could pretend to be above petty grudges like this, Aizawa was not fooled. Daniel was just as competitive and arrogant, but his saving grace were friendliness and openness. It could be for the better that Fenton was too stubborn to let Bakugou win. Sure, initially Aizawa expected the former to taunt, to play with an opponent and hold back, as that's what Bakugou hated. But that way, facing an enemy who was hellbent on bringing up the other half of the raven-haired teen, Daniel would be one step closer to letting go of his childish reservations. Namu was the first step, but it was a living human this time, a strong one, and just as unbreakable. Thus, Aizawa was looking forward to that match. And begin. Midnight shouted. True to his tactics, Bakugou launched himself forward at a neck-breaking speed. Upon getting closer, he immediately released an explosive blast right into the Halfa's face. When the smoke cleared, he saw the green barrier that had shielded his enemy. With a smirk, Fenton made a flinging motion with his finger when the ectoplasm of the shield glowed before a spike emerged from it, forcing Bakugou to dodge. It was too slow and telegraphed to actually land a hit, but he jumped exactly where the Halfa wanted, landing right where the latter's fist was aimed at. Discarding the shield, Phantom had ended up near the blonde, close enough to land a hit. His victory was incredibly short, for at that very second Bakugou blasted him right into the chest. The combatants launched each other meters away from each other. Bakugou did not hesitate. He continued his relentless assault. An explosion behind his back propelled him forward, and he had to dodge the green blasts fired his way. It held him off long enough for Danny to summon an ice wall before him. At the last second, Bakugou had to move his arms forward not to fly into it. The explosion sent him flying back and blew the wall up in a blue mist, smoke, and sharp shards. And from that improvised smokescreen Danny emerged, having pushed himself forward with full force, his eyes and fist blazing with death energy. Bakugou made a blast below and flew higher, right above the half-ghost, from where he released another explosion, blocked by a green shield once more. These two are not giving each other a second of rest. Present Mike spoke excitedly. Bakugou is a quick thinker, Aizawa spoke. He can plan an attack while under the assault, but Fenton's reaction time is twice as fast as normal humans. So they nicely complement each other, the commenter concluded. Danny laughed as he dodged another explosive attack and landed a kick, once more pushing the blonde away. It was better to keep distance, for the Halfa held an advantage at a long distance. To achieve the same feat, Bakugou would have to make an extraordinarily big boom, something that would put a strain on him. You hear that, number 2? Fenton grinned. We make a nice match. Shut up and fight, Spook. Bakugou yelled and ran at him once more. He was yet to make significant damage to the opponent's exterior, while Fenton's smug face continuously mocked him. The spook was a tough opponent that worked by his own rules that he imposed on others. A big explosion could break through the shield, or the fiery blast wave could go under. That left the prospect of the last second intangibility, something that would render moot all the effort. He had to find a way around it, somehow. As bakugou flew towards him, Danny conjured a myriad of ice spheres that were flung in his direction. Upon making contact with the out-of-bounds walls or the ground, they blew up and covered all surrounding surfaces in a thin glacier, but bakugou managed to either dodge or blow up the projectiles coming his way. The Halfa jumped forward and sunk into the ground as if jumping into a pool of water. The surprised blonde immediately blasted himself higher in the air, where Danny couldn't grab or attack him from below. Small explosions kept him away from the ground, breaking the silence that settled after the contestant's disappearance. "Looks like our resident specter decided to take his time," Present Mike grumbled. Bakugou's red eyes scanned his surroundings. Fenton's attack could come from anywhere. He could swear that something flashed in the corner of his eye for a fraction of a second, and released an explosion in that direction. But immediately he felt the scorching heat of ectoplasm on the back of his head that shot him down. Fenton dropped invisibility, grinning triumphantly as his hand was still smoking with the residual energy. As bakugou landed on his feet, he tried to grasp what had just happened. Had he been seeing things? How did he get behind his back so quickly? Danny landed back on the ground, casually approaching his opponent, his look and stance daring the blonde to attack again and receive the same beating. "You know, I guess it should be quite refreshing," he spoke, "with how much of a shit you are to everyone." "What did you just say?" bakugou yelled. "You heard me, number 2. Everyone tolerates your obnoxious bull because you have something to compensate it with. But I just don't like you." With a loud roar, bakugou blasted himself forward, once again going for a frontal assault. The Halfa put a dome-like shield once again to meet the onslaught. This time, however, the explosion carried enough power to envelop the surroundings in a sea of fire, shattering the defense. Danny was caught off guard and was blasted into the face with another explosion. Flying backwards, he stopped the momentum by blowing up a weaker ball of ectoplasm behind his back and landed on the ground. Bakugou was infuriated at what he had just seen. Bakugou broke through Fenton's defense. Present Mike exclaimed through the noise of the crowd. But it looks like the specter ripped a page out of bakugou's book when it comes to flight. The Halfa huffed upon hearing this and fixed his spine that didn't take too kindly to such moves. How bakugou handled such strain was quite impressive. The battle was not over yet, but he was dangerously close to the boundary of the arena, and his face was covered in first-degree burns that would take some time to heal. "What's wrong, spook?" Bakugou laughed. "Not much of a show without your flashy side, huh?" He exclaimed this and came to finish the job, seeing Fenton's unamused look. Let me think," he said and lazily outstretched his palm. Immediately encased in a prison of green aura, bakugou was violently tossed away and ran through the cement ground, away from where Fenton stood. "I still do have a few tricks," Danny commented, neglecting the burning feeling on his face. Needless to say that Aizawa was not satisfied with what he was seeing from the two of his students. Fenton was too stubborn to use his power on someone he despised and who was asking for that very same thing. It just got him wounded harder than the entirety of the tournament beforehand, yet he still refused to release his pent-up power in full. Bakugou in the meantime would not be satisfied with anything but bringing up the full might of the enemy, and even if Fenton lied on the ground, helpless, he would not finish the fight until then. That big explosion was but him being angered, and that meant that more injuries would ensue. Perhaps not to the degree of Midoriya, whose were more of a self-harm than anything, for Fenton was holding back and could take the damage and heal it. "They really hold no bars," Present Mike commented with diminished enthusiasm. Bakugou growled with an animal-like rage as he was getting up, feeling the pain from impacting the cement floor not once but twice by now. Danny shortened the distance as fast as he could, and the blonde turned to face him, releasing another explosion. Fenton released a crescent-shaped blast, using the temporary blind zone the explosions created. Bakugou got a burning feeling as it hit him, burned him and left a huge tear in his uniform. The blonde hissed in pain, before seeing that Fenton went for a physical strike. Bakugou dodged it at the last second. Danny turned towards him, saw the damage he had dealt and smirked. Seeing this, Bakugou growled once more. "You piece of shit. That's what you wanted, didn't you?" Danny responded, the ectoplasm around his arm dissipating, but his eyes emitting the same deathly glow. "To give you more and more until one of us breaks. But there's a hard-to-swallow truth compared to the usual guys I used to fight. You are just a Saturday morning baddie." Bakugou was about to retort, saying that the Halfa was far from unharmed, but then noticed that the burns he had inflicted looked less severe. He was already healing, and it was grinding his gears. "Shut up," "You are nothing but an extra," he instead responded, with explosions cracking around his fingers. Here it was, something Danny had sought to bring out from the start. "Then you will be beaten by an extra," Fenton assumed the stance. "By the way, this loss will make you number 3 by default, won't it?" And that was a final straw. Without thinking, without a plan, Bakugou rushed forward, blowing apart everything in his path, ripping even the concrete beneath. Getting caught up in this was going to be nasty. Still, the rage left him open and susceptible to what the Halfa was about to do. Without moving an inch, even going so far as to let the flame of the explosion touch him once more, holding out against the pain, he turned intangible and vanished. The furious Bakugou came to a halt, frantically looking around. "He isn't going to try and pull the same trick twice, is he?" asked Present Mike. "I have a feeling I know what he is planning," Aizawa mumbled without enthusiasm. Suddenly Bakugou felt it, a tugging feeling in the back of his head, followed by a haunting realization of what was happening. Then he felt the cold wash over his body as he felt his knees buckle. The show caught everyone by surprise as Bakugou let out a yell. "What's happening?" Present Mike asked in shock. Fenton decided to use his another power, something he used to defeat Namu, Aizawa explained. As every ghost, he can take over someone's body. And as if to confirm his words, Bakugou continued to yell. "Get out of my head," he exclaimed and made a blast into the air. He actually did this, Kirishima breathed out, uncomfortable about what he was seeing. "But I thought Bakugou would be strong enough to force him out. So that's why he was angering Kaken." Midoriya spoke with realization. "He is too consumed by anger to bring out his willpower." "You mean that's what Fenton-san was planning from the start?" Ida asked with wide eyes. Perhaps one of the more surprised people was Shinso, who had long since started watching the battles from the sidelines. Among other powers, he also had the one akin to his. The teen also could hear the whispers travel around the crowd. Yes, Shinso's ability was less graphic, and the audience obviously wasn't excited about this. Fenton, however, was obviously going for the win. Bakugou saw how one of his arms shakily turned in direction opposite from the nearest arena boundary. A single blast and he would fly there and lose pathetically. "For all your planning," he could hear a voice in his head. "You are sometimes an open book. Don't worry, I'm not digging into your memory. Just you try to do this, spook," Bakugou furiously hissed. And yet, he was smart enough to understand what was preventing him from pushing that parasite off. "I read your thoughts, number 2. You aren't getting away from me that easily." And they thought him to be the most villain-like in the group. Bakugou saw the sparks appearing in his palm. Fenton was obviously trying to figure out how to set the foreign quirk off. It was more complicated than the brute force of Namu. Bakugou had to stop it, so he tried to muster all the willpower that he could. And ironically, his burning hatred, initially the very reason he lost the authority over his own body, was aiding him now. Danny could feel his control slipping, so he tried to concentrate on the explosion. But that also meant that the control over the rest was lost even quicker. Then, he finally figured it out and the explosion finally took place. But it was also when the Halfa lost all semblance of control and was pushed out of the blonde's body. Danny landed on his feet and pulled back the messy hair as Bakugou flew away. The latter, realizing what he had to do, created another blast that kept him within the arena. "Would you look at that?" Bakugou managed to resist the possession. Present Mike said through the cheers of the fickle crowd. Danny himself smirked as he saw Bakugou land. "Looks like I underestimated you," he commented. "Good job, number 2, the Halfa clapped slowly. "So far only my father managed to do that to my memory." That sounded a lot more sinister than it should have. "Shut up," Bakugou growled, ignoring the sore pain in his hands. The overuse of his quirk was showing the effects. "I don't need your crap. Just stand and fight," he yelled, lunging forward once more. Fenton prepared to shield himself as he concocted another plan. But something seemed different. Had he created a plan this fast? He hadn't seen that in Bakugou's mind. Danny saw how instead of making an explosion, his palms were simply glowing with bright yellow light. Since Bakugou's hands were too occupied to let him fly, Fenton attempted to shoot at him, and even grazed the blonde's shoulder. But once Bakugou got close enough, he suddenly let loose of what he was holding. The shield did not help the Halfa, because the explosion was not meant for damage in the first place. Instead, it created a blinding flash of light, something like a stun grenade. Caught off guard, Danny shielded his eyes, and Bakugou took the moment of weakness to the fullest. Immediately he followed the explosion with another, whose purpose was only destruction. The entire arena was enveloped in a large, damage-heavy inferno, which clouded everyone's view of the contestants. When the smoke dissipated, the audience saw that both fighters were still standing, albeit at the opposite ends of the arena. Fenton had had no choice but to meet the blast head-on, and it showed. His left arm looked limp and bleeding, and the upper part of the gym uniform was all but burned off. Bakugou himself looked a little better, for the explosion was not directed his way. The blonde started approaching his opponent and saw how the Haffa took off the shredded rags. Surprised, Bakugou and everyone else bore witness to something unexpected. Fenton's upper body was almost entirely covered in one enormous and horrid Lichtenberg scar, seemingly originating where his heart was located, spreading in a myriad of branches across the entire chest. Noticing Bakugou's surprise, Fenton chuckled sadly. "I did tell you guys how my quirk awakened. In an electric trap with the power of a nuclear reactor. No need to act so surprised," he said, looking at his wounded arm. "Healing that in human form would take a while. Guess that explains why I don't like being shocked." He sighed and looked at Bakugou. "I really did misjudge you, number 2. Should have known that you are more than a match for my human form," he added, his eyes glowing green. "I guess I don't have any choice," he said this as the pearly white rings enveloped his body, casting aside the damaged human form and letting the white-haired ghost prince take over. Putting the now healing hand to his forehead, Danny gave a small smirk. "Now let's see how long you last." It was Fenton's time to make an advance. Once again he was surrounded by the spheres of ice that flew towards Bakugou. The boy began to dodge, but his stamina was not a bottomless tank. By that time he had grown sloppy, and while he was able to dodge the spheres, he blinked, and Phantom was already near him, his gloved hand enveloped in ectoenergy. It happened so quick that Bakugou could not avoid a hit to the chest. The blonde flew away, and Fenton caught up with him with the use of portals and kicked him from above into the ground. Bakugou tried to punch him with an explosive fist, but found that his hand was simply sucked into the opponent's chest, and the small explosion simply died off within. Phantom grabbed that arm and lifted Bakugou into the air, before throwing him even closer to the bounds. "Looks like the shift gave Fenton one hell of a second breath," the announcer spoke. Aizawa was satisfied that the Haffa decided to finally give it his all. It should serve as a valuable lesson for him, and Bakugou had to learn that there would be obstacles too hard for him to overcome, and that such demanding tactics could end poorly for him. Danny turned intangible to avoid another explosion. Then, he lazily raised his palm and lifted Bakugou in the air. It was a very good fight. Maybe one day. And with a flick of his finger, the blonde finally left the boundary, flung forward with enough force. "Bakugou is out of bounds," Midnight declared. "Fenton wins." The audience cheered in excitement, while Fenton mustered the adrenaline-filled strength to salute them. He opted to stay in that form, to let the injuries heal faster, even if it costed him energy. The next fight was also his, so he had no time for it otherwise. As he left the fighting ground, he could hear Bakugou shouting after him. Danny turned to face him. The blonde was shaking from rage, as his hands were still ready to make another explosion. "Come back here, Spook, we are not done yet," he exclaimed. "Yes, we are," Danny sighed, stretching his neck. "Admit your defeat and move on, Bakugou." He used the boy's actual name for the first time in a while. "I can still fight, these rules are." He didn't finish his sentence, as he was hit by the fumes Midnight's skin could let out. They knocked him out immediately. The teacher sighed and shook her head. "Go on and rest, Fenton." "Oh, could you carry him to the nurse, if you are fine with your injuries?" Danny sighed, picking the unconscious opponent up and putting Bakugou on his shoulder. "I'm fine, ma'am. Regeneration and all that. Thank you." The fight was a grand spectacle for sure, and perhaps the most vigilant viewer of them all was Todoroki. He had watched the whole fight from his own preparation room, and tried to come up with a proper plan to go against the most dangerous of his opponents to date. Fenton had spent some of his energy by now, but it didn't mean that their battle would be a ride in the park. Still, he could notice the parallel between his flames and Fenton's own reluctance. Come to think of it, Danny wasn't afraid to claim someone's power as his own, was he? His frivolous use of portals was a pretty good testament to that. Their approach was different, and it rang with Midoriya's words that the latter had said to him, claiming that the flames were his own and not his father's. The teen still could not make up his mind about all of this. Midoriya had given him a good lesson, but the years-long reservations did not just vanish like this, no matter how convincing the green-haired teen had been. But if you looked at this from pragmatic standpoint, there was little chance against Fenton if he utilized solely the ice. They had fought before in the battle trial, after all, and it was Todoroki who had lost, utilizing the very tactic he really wanted to fall back to. Now they were not even limited by the environment. The odds were hardly in Todoroki's favor. As he thought about this, the door suddenly opened, revealing the very object of his pondering. Looking surprised to see him. What are you?" he began, before looking at the door sign. "Huh, I really thought it was room 12. You are already back from the hospital." Todoroki asked calmly. Yeah, going through walls and all shortens the distance, responded Danny in his echoing voice. Anyway, sorry for disturbing, you do you. Wait, Todoroki said, making the Half-a stop. I have a question. As if nothing had been going on, the Half-a grinned and summoned a chair to sit on by the teen's side. What can your diligent class rep help you with? Phantom tilted his head. Looks like he was back to his sarcastic personality. I have a question for you. Shoot. How do you feel about the powers you have? The question wasn't perfect, too general perhaps, but it was the best Todoroki could come up with at the moment. Danny didn't show it, but he knew exactly what the teen was alluding towards. Can't say I asked for them, he began. I mean, you know I got them only a year ago, and by that time I basically dealt with being a nobody, and they sure got me in a lot of trouble. Hell, my parents decided that I became a mistake of nature that can't share the same roof with them. Danny shifted in his seat, the hefty amount of additions on his suit jumping around as well. Perhaps the greater issue here is I know what I can do with it. Believe it or not, I once met a guy who can look into the future, and he showed it to me. Showed me the monster that carried my name and face and who was a genocidal machine. It was one hell of a wake-up call. Todoroki was surprised to hear it, but then again sometimes Fenton was borderline villainous by the world's standards. But you are still fine with relying on your powers. Danny chuckled. I have one hell of a scream, you know, one that can destroy a city block if I put my everything on it. I learned it from looking at my future self. Todoroki blinked. You decided to use the power of that monster. It was the thing that saved my loved ones and my teacher from death. Danny kept smiling. So no, I don't have any problem with that, or the portals, or anything else I learned for that matter. After all, if you take your father's screwdriver to fix your own toy, it is your achievement. The screwdriver is only an instrument. Just like hero powers. That's an oddly specific example. Best I could come up with, Danny shrugged innocently. Not the best, I admit. But that's what I think. We are our own people. It doesn't matter where we take our powers, knowledge or advice, even if it is the most Fruit Loopish person in the world. We all make mistakes and carry stuff. What's the point of needlessly taking someone else's? Todoroki turned away in thought. Midoriya said the same things. Sure, Danny got up. Although the situation didn't let him explain this in much detail, I bet. He simply rushed in to destroy all the problems I've been carrying. Todoroki mumbled. Thank you, too, Fenton. The Half-a turned to leave and waved his hand. But don't you think I forgot who was giving orders to Kaminari, Todoroki? He smirked. I still hold a grudge. It's finally the last battle of the UA High School Sport Festival. President Mike joyously announced. The top of the first years will be decided in this match. The final, so to speak. The audience around the world was glued to their screens to witness the final confrontation as the two contestants made their way to the arena. From the hero course, Todoroki Shoto, versus also from the hero course, Fenton Daniel. The opponents took their places at the opposite ends of the arena. Danny still had not let go of his ghost form, despite his injuries having healed by then. To many it was a clear sign that he meant business that time. And now begin. Fenton once again was the defender at the start. Todoroki immediately released the titanic amount of ice, like during his fight against Zero at the very start. And Danny responded to this by firing an enormously sized blast of ectoplasm that simply melted a corridor through the giant ice structure. Fenton went through the dark corridor he had created without care in the world, a smug smirk on his face, unseen, unlike his glowing eyes. Tusk, Danny spoke, thinking to avoid a fight like that. That's some wishful thinking. It was wishful. That's why the amount of ice was smaller than in a fight against Zero. Precisely not to remain defenseless if the attack failed. It was Phantom's time to attack. He waved his gloved palm, releasing more crescent-shaped blasts, and each time Todoroki summoned a wall of ice that was crushed by the energy of death. Yet each time the wall broke, Todoroki could see Phantom being closer and closer to him. The Half-a was not in any hurry, but he could change that any second, keeping the enemy on edge. And once the distance was meager enough, Fenton did just that, flying forward at a neck-breaking speed. Immediately he approached Todoroki's mostly blind zone, the boy's left, landing a hit on the stomach. The downside to him controlling the strength of the punches was that the opponents always flew away instead of buckling in pain. It was actually more of a push than a hit, and it was getting annoying at this point. Ghosts didn't do that. Still, Todoroki managed to create an ice slide to prevent himself from being tossed out of bounds. Sliding around the arena, Todoroki created more ice to attack. An ice blade also appeared in Phantom's hands. A single powerful slash was enough to break any glacial wave coming to consume him. The difference in composition made sure that the blade itself did not receive a single scratch. Fenton decided to get fancy all of a sudden, President Mike commented. I'd call him a show-off, but this kid has style, too. In the meantime, the Haffa decided that it was the time to reveal another of his cards. He sure held Todoroki off. If only there was someone to attack his defenseless self. Then, all of a sudden, Todoroki felt like something punched him into the face. The invisible force pushed him off the slide and made him land on the ground. Wait a second, what just happened? Asked the announcer, and everyone had the same question. There had been no light around Todoroki to indicate the use of telekinesis. But then, the Haffa came with answer. This is not against the rules to enlist some help, is it? He asked. And then, floating above the spot Todoroki had been pushed off the slide, another Danny was seen, lazily waving. Is this a duplicate? Asked Present Mike, glancing at Aizawa, who looked surprised himself. He hasn't shown that power before, the teacher explained, wondering just how much the boy had not shown yet. And back with the students, Midoriya was furiously scribbling in his journal, while the rest of the classmates were just as surprised. So that's how he always has time for everything, Kirishima realized. That brought a sudden change to Todoroki's plans. He saw how the two phantoms fist pumped, and the teen didn't know how that part of the quirk functioned. Was one of them the original, or were they a part of the single being? He had no time to find out, for the onslaught was doubled from then on. No matter what the duplicate was, it spelled trouble. The amount of green blasts increased, so that Todoroki had no choice but to duck behind an ice wall and take cover. But it was soon blown up as well. Humming under his nose, Danny snapped his fingers, and the duplicate vanished. Too much firepower could prove fatal. He approached Todoroki's position, readying an ectoplasm just in case. Whatever it is you are thinking about, Todoroki, he spoke. You better come up and solve now. This dilemma makes you sloppier than before. Todoroki, a sudden shout came from the audience, and to be particular, the seat of Class 1A. Don't lose. Do your best. Midoriya, both contestants mumbled at the same time, one with surprise and another with amusement. And then, as if finally coming to a decision, Todoroki let his left side be engulfed in fire. With a smirk, Fenton switched to his power over ice, as it could also defend himself if the attack failed. Then, bringing out contents of his very core, he unleashed the blizzard. The snow and ice were so blindingly white under the bright sun that Danny had to shut his eyes. Unlike the ice of his opponent, Phantom's beam covered the entire arena, and the area around it in a thin layer of either ice or frost. And while the blizzard was dissipating, Fenton began to notice the abnormality. That went perhaps too smooth. And when the area was freed from the clutches of cold fog, he and the audience saw how Todoroki was left frozen to the wall, out of bounds. What? Danny whispered. Todoroki is out of bounds. Midnight exclaimed and shivered. Fenton wins. And in spite of the thunderously cheering crowd, several people were left puzzled, confused and shocked at Todoroki's behavior. Indeed, now all of the events have been concluded. Present Mike spoke, his teeth chattering. The winner of this year's first-year UA Sports Festival is Fenton Daniel from Class 1A. With the preparations over and with the ice melted by the one who had left it, it was finally the time for ceremonies. With the students gathered in the center of the stadium, Midnight spoke up. Now, we will begin the award ceremony, she said, and then came the fanfares and fireworks. During the light show, an award podium emerged from under the ground, presenting a very bizarre sight. The first and second places were occupied by Danny and Todoroki respectively, but Bakugou with his third place was in fact shackled to a concrete pole, with his mouth and hands chained up like he was a criminal on his way to a death sentence. The measures were not unjust, for ever since waking up he was like a rabid animal trying to rip apart the winner. Danny himself seemed very uncomfortable near him, but he also wondered where Ida, the other third-place winner, was. Midnight came to the rescue. There is also Ida in the third place, but he had to leave early due to family reasons. The presentation of medals will, of course, be done by this man. Everyone heard the heroic laughter that could only belong to one hero. And true enough, from the roof of the stadium jumped none other than All Might. Our own hero All Might. I have brought the medals, he exclaimed as he landed. Now, please, award the finalists going from the third place to the first. And the one All Might approached initially broke his elated mood just a little. That's a bit excessive, he mumbled as he started undoing the iron muzzle. Congratulations on making it this far. This doesn't mean shit. Bakugou yelled at the top of his lungs. If I don't recognize victory, it doesn't matter. But All Might was not shaken by a furious teen. He kept smiling as he fruitlessly tried to put a bronze medal over the teen's neck. Then, think of it as a reminder to try your best in the future. Aeon thought. If the neck didn't work, then he would hold it with his mouth, All Might decided. Danny tried his best to resist a laugh, knowing it would worsen the situation. All Might then proceeded to Shoto, who was silent all the time ever since the end of the match. Young Todoroki, All Might greeted as he put the silver medal on him. Congratulations. And then he lowered his voice. And yet Danny was near, and his hearing was top-notch. I suppose there is a reason you did not use your left. I had my opportunity against Midoriya. After that, I was unsure of what to do. I think I understand what you saw in him. I wanted to become a hero like you, but I don't think it would be the right thing for me to be the only one to break away. There's still something I must settle. He said this and glanced at Danny as well. He must have realized that the sheepish Haffa was listening. Thank you too for an advice, Fenton-san. I'm your rep. That's kinda my job. Danny shrugged and smiled. All Might nodded, glad to see the sense of camaraderie that had grown a bit since the start. After the fury of the cavalry battle, the hero expected Danny to repeat the thing with Kaminari. Yet, there was an obvious sense of respect. And in fact, two of the other people on the podium have grown in the Haffa's eyes. And he also opened up to Todoroki, who now saw him as something more than an arrogant and powerful classmate. Ultimately, it did everyone good, as much as Bakugou would deny it. The look on your face is different from before, All Might told Todoroki and enveloped the relatively tiny teen in a hug. I'm sure that you will achieve what you are trying to do. Yes, came a brief response. Then, All Might approached the smiling Haffa. Now then, young Fenton. The hero spoke. Your performance today was nothing short of outstanding. You have shown excellent teamwork, battle prowess and cunning, and also a hefty amount of conceit. The Haffa blushed in embarrassment. Oh thanks, All Might bellowed with laughter. Stand proud, young Fenton. Show confidence not only as a hero, but as a person too. And do further great things not only as a defender of justice, but as a classmate and a man. With this being said, All Might put the golden medal on the neck of the chuckling Haffa. Not something I expected when coming here, he mumbled. Happens to the best of us. All Might laughed. You know, he whispered, you remind me of one person. Really? The Haffa tilted his head. Or, rather, something he is not. In a very positive way. Danny raised his eyebrow, making All Might make a loud cough. Well, he spoke to the crowd. They were the winners today. But listen here, anyone could end up on these podiums. It's just as you saw, competing, improving each other, and climbing even further. The next generation of heroes is definitely sprouting. Wish my speech was like that, Danny thought to himself. So, I have only one more thing to say that I want you to say with me. All Might shouted and raised his hand. Thank you for your hard work. Plus ultra. The crowd was left befuddled as to why the top hero neglected the school motto, which made for a good laugh for someone. It was true that the tournament was a launchpad for many aspiring heroes, and it served the purpose well. Already the agencies were in a rush to prepare proper invitations to the promising ones, those that impressed them, those whose quirks could see their uses. But aside from those usual observers, there were others. Already the criminal world, some members of it, could recognize the moveset of one particular contestant. They didn't know what they would do with that information, so for the time being it was just a topic for private talks. But what of the opposite end of the spectrum? Well, their interest was piqued as well. You have brought the papers, correct? The question was asked by a stern-looking middle-aged woman to her subordinate, standing at the opposite end of the office desk. Yes, the school has sent us the information we requested, but, admittedly, not much to go by. I am aware of that fact. That Fenton kid just popped out of nowhere and made a stir. Then you won't be surprised by what I have to report. Receiving a nod, the man continued. We have run the names, and it turns out that the boy's hometown is a ruse. It does not exist. How did his papers were even considered legal, then? We have no idea. That and his non-existent documents should have been a problem to the MIC, yet it's as if something or someone decided to influence them. We have asked the people who are responsible for approving the kid's papers, but they don't even remember it. This does sound suspicious. Anything else? We have a suspicion that he may be one of the American government's pet projects. Big powers are not beyond this. True, but don't you think that they would have come for their runaway toy? We have received no requests, but now this will be more problematic. Indeed, if he receives an internship abroad, we may never see him again. True, we would not want to lose such a valuable asset. The many quirks of his are also an issue. Anything on that front? From what the school told us, he so far refused the medical tests. It's not obligatory, so it's not something we usually demand. We know only of one person capable of that feat, and appearance-wise, it's something to consider. We need a tighter leash until we know everything. You know what to do in such cases. Arrange us a meeting, Yamato. Danny-kun, are you alright going like that? Mina's question was addressed to one half-ghost who had forgotten his umbrella at home on a rainy day. The Haffa gave his thumbs up and stepped out from under the roof of the bus stop. His intangibility let the droplets go through, leaving him absolutely dry. His friends just rewarded him with deadpan looks as they went the rest of the way on foot. Well, Danny just floated, lest he fell through the ground. Only one day had passed since the games, and the crowd obviously had not forgotten about them, and those who entertained them so. Hiroshima and Mina took the praises they received in the bus somewhat well, but they had to keep their third accomplice from going invisible. They knew not of his vigilante past, otherwise they would have mused once more about why was he so unused to receiving praise from bystanders. Honestly, Danny was somehow less confident than his undead counterpart, which was to be expected. Yes, by now everyone knew that they were one and the same, but it was a remnant of the old times, when he could allow himself more outgoing and confident behavior, knowing it would never be linked to his human part. Guess that's what they mean by waking up famous one day, huh? Hiroshima asked, noticing how people waved at them, and remembering the chaos their trip on a bus was. That's so neat, though, Mina grinned. Imagine what it's like for actual heroes. Can't imagine them being too happy. Danny scratched his cheek. I suggest saving money for some bulky chums to keep them away. That's just you, Danny-kun, Mina nudged him. Our very own antisocial death machine. More like dead machine, the halfer rolled his eyes. What? You started it. You really are taking this whole theme seriously. They didn't know just how much, Danny thought with amusement. Nonetheless, the three of them eventually made it to the school. There, in the classroom, the students were eagerly chatting about their own adventures on the way to UA. Not that Danny got a chance to share. Mina did all the talking before he could even get to it. You really need to work on your social skills, man, said Zero and cackled. A hero needs to stand in the spotlight after all. The only spotlight he would usually be given before was the one over vivisection table, but Danny chose not to say this out loud. Maybe, Danny responded instead and shrugged. As long as this spotlight ain't like Mita's, I'm still here, the grape boy exclaimed. I know, that's why I said it, Danny smiled innocently, before swinging back in the air and facing the silent Todoroki upside down. What about you, Todoroki? The teen blinked and stared at the blue-eyed Haffa. It was fine. I'm used to it. Used to oh, I get it. Being the son of number 2 hero came with certain things, he supposed. They were interrupted when Aizawa entered the classroom. As per usual disciplinary procedures, his greeting was responded in kind by students who immediately took their seats. The tired teacher once again looked over the classroom and sighed tiredly. Today we are having a special hero informatics class. His words sent tremor among the most impressionable of the students, who feared that the teacher had a stack of test papers stashed in his desk. You'll be coming up with hero names. And that statement in turn made the elated kids show their excitement too much, enough for the teacher to make scary red eyes to force them to keep quiet. Danny was not among them, for the sole reason that he, well, already had a name. So his excitement was mostly due to the fact that he wouldn't have to do anything at all that day. That was quite fortunate. This is related to the draft picks I mentioned the other day. The drafts begin in the earnest during the 2nd and 3rd years, after students have gained experience and can become immediate assets to the pros. In other words, for them to extend offers to first years like you shows that they are interested in your potential. These offers are often cancelled if the interest dies down by graduation. So we'll have to prove ourselves, then, asked Hagakure. Yes, and let's take a look at the offers. The list made a lot of students raise their eyebrows, because there was one peculiarity that made everyone turn to look at Danny. His name was at the very bottom, with Todoroki and Bakugou being 1st and 2nd respectively. Is this chart the actual one? Hiroshima asked. Yeah, why is the winner of the games only has a couple of offers? Added Zero. Aizawa sighed, glancing at the befuddled Haffa. This is something that we too will discuss in private. There's a reason for that, and the school is aware of it. Something unpleasant arose in Danny's stomach. He really did not like where this was going. So many possibilities and ideas rushed through his head, ranging in terms of gore and general dislike of his ghost self some may have had. He stared at the chalkboard, wondering what urged those few people to take interest when others had opted to stay put. It was even more suspicious at that point. There weren't any names for him to make judgment, and honestly, he would not be able to make a call, since he was not much interested in heroes themselves. He also wondered if Makoto was actually one of those daring people. Danny got thoughtful, while the rest of the class was eagerly chatting about their own offers. Midoriya actually shared Danny's misfortune, actually getting no offers at all, most likely because his tactics so far were very reckless, and the agencies were reluctant. Keeping these results in mind, whether someone asked you or not, you will all be participating in internships with pros. At USJ you already got the chance to experience combat with real villains, but it will still be valuable training for you to see heroes work firsthand. Oh, so that's why we pick hero names. Uraraka guessed. Aizawa nodded. These are temporary, but if you don't pay it enough attention, there will be a hell to pay later. The shout came from the open doors as Midnight strolled into the classroom, much to the delight of certain members of male audience. Because a lot of hero names used by students become recognized by society, they end up becoming real hero names. That's how it is, Aizawa confirmed. I'm not the person to ask for counseling in this matter. That's why Midnight will be making sure your names are okay. Remember this well. When you take up a name, you get a more concrete image of what you want to be like in the future. As they say, names and nature often agree. After the encouragement, white tablets were passed down among the students to write down their hero names. When Danny got his hands on one, he almost instantly came to a decision. For over a year he had been carrying his moniker, the one that had stuck to him so well. It was a pointless endeavor to try and think up any synonyms to the word ghost, when Danny Phantom was already his second name. However, scratching out his first name seemed like a logical step, especially since everyone and their mother addressed his ghostly form like that. The local heroes also held certain epithets before their names, like Aizawa having the title of Erasure Hero. Okay, Midnight spoke. Let's start presenting names, beginning with those who are ready. It did come off as a surprise to many, and Danny saw Kirishima's reaction, too. The half-ghost had been gallivanting with his name anyhow, so he was more at ease. The first to come forth was Aoyama, who proudly raised his tablet. The shining hero, I cannot stop twinkling. Danny held back a laugh at the amalgamation of a name, but he knew better than to laugh at someone. Surprisingly, Midnight chose to be more reserved in her remarks. You probably should remove I and shorten cannot to can't. Thank you, mademoiselle. Danny sighed and got up next, approaching the teacher's desk. Better get that over with, and perhaps give some courage to the rest. At his own expense. Prepare to be shocked, he said sarcastically and flipped the tablet. The spectral hero, Phantom. Why not a ghost hero? Asked Zero. Well, while spectral is not as specific, Midnight responded, Phantom is basically synonymous to the word ghost. It's basically like saying that water is wet. But Aizawa-sensei is Erasure Hero, pointed out Midoriya. True, but that's what you were guided by, weren't you, Fenton? Asked Midnight. I just like this one more, Danny mumbled in embarrassment. Oh, well, it is still a good hero name. Concise and to the point. You can go back to your seat. You will be coming with me for a moment, suddenly said Aizawa from his sleeping bag. It will save both of us some time, he added. Oh, sure, Midnight shrugged as the teacher made a gesture for Danny to follow him. Once the two were out of the classroom, followed by several curious and worried pairs of eyes, Aizawa made sure that there was nobody else around in the corridor. Is this about my internship, sir? Danny asked. It is, Aizawa nodded. You see, the reason you didn't get many invitations was because you were added on a special list. This doesn't sound ominous at all. It's not as horrid as you imagine. This list is made by Hero Public Safety Commission, a special organ dedicated to heroes and villains. They take interest in some especially promising or dangerous individuals from the school desks as well. And which category am I in? Danny narrowed his eyes, not liking where this was going. Certainly not the latter. We would not be talking otherwise. The information is confidential, shared only among the agencies. Basically, they are not to send their information to you. The ones that did are either too influential or oblivious to the list, which are the ones you would not have taken interest in the first place. Wow, stripping me of potential employers is a great way to make me fulfill my civic duty, Danny grumbled. Aizawa sighed. If it is any consolation, I think Allmight too was under their scrutiny. And Hawks, who? Danny tilted his head. You should know your math if you want to work as a hero, Fenton, the teacher responded. He is a number 3 hero. What I am getting at is that you should take this as a recognition of your skill and power. Recognition itself ain't gonna feed me, Danny crossed his hands. Can't you people just send letters and talk? I'm not debating this, Fenton, that's not what I called you for. I volunteered to explain to you what to do. Thanks, I suppose, Danny sighed. Go on. It isn't much, but you should visit the commission and talk to them. From what I gathered, for now they simply wish to know more of you. Gee, can't wait to show them my spaceship collection. The half-a deadpanned. Will I be able to be an intern? Maybe. Allmight was. I suggest you talk to him when you get the chance, he will know more than me. At this, Danny nodded. The situation he was in did not bring him any joy, as his memories of all government interactions was a poor one. Well, for his ghost self, he was among the reasons an entire agency was created under the congressional control. He would have been proud, if not for their desire to inhumanely cut him apart. Now the history was all too eager to repeat itself, and for all his displeasure, Danny knew that he'd better not screw up. Not after everything he had done. He soon returned to the class, being told not to talk about the commission. Danny sat through the remaining part of the lessons as his classmates picked their names one by one. The half-a, however, no matter the wish to act attentive, could only pay half a mind to it, trying to come to terms with the situation and come up with a plan. Still, he shared a laugh at Bakugou's ridiculous placeholder name, and amusedly noted the nature of Kirishima's. Nina's name Alien Queen was just as outlandish as her, which made it suitable. As the school day went on, Danny tried to do as Aizawa had instructed, ask Allmight for that unique sort of advice. However, his search was largely fruitless initially. Danny spent a large portion of the lunch break trying to find the teacher, but he probably had more important things to do. And as he searched for the teacher, he didn't notice a person curiously following him around. And as Danny was near the cafeteria building, he thought he had seen something oddly reminiscent of a face. The half-a turned back and saw nothing, blinking and then dismissing it as a trick of his perplexed mind. That is, until he turned forward once more and saw a blonde head sticking from the wall. "Hello there," the head of a blue-eyed boy spoke. "All right, what did they put in my soda?" Danny asked slowly. "Copious amounts of sugar. Bad for your heart?" The boy grinned. "But you seem all right." Danny smirked. "For my heart to fail, it has to start beating for a change. So, Mr. Potato Head, come here often." The blonde cackled. "Not really. I've been looking for you. You are Fenton-san, right?" "My fame precedes me," Danny sighed dramatically. "What do you need, eh?" "Oh, right." The older boy's face was that of realization. "I'm supposed to introduce myself, too. I'm Mirio, from Class 3B. Danny raised an eyebrow. "Nice to meet you, but I'm still waiting for an answer." Mirio grinned and vanished inside the wall again, believing this to be an invitation. As the boy had clearly watched the games and knew the half-a was capable of puroing, Danny calmly phased inside, his search temporarily forgotten. Immediately he saw how a taller, muscular young man scrutinized him. The half-a hadn't expected someone with such a childlike face to possess such a build. "So he does have a body?" Danny smirked. As you can see, Mirio rubbed his chin, obviously thinking about something. "How did you go through the wall so easily and kept standing?" That was an odd question, but Danny tried to answer it. "I never actually stand," he explained. "I always float millimeters above ground. So I just went through." "And what of clothes?" "I can spread intangibility to everything I touch, including my clothes. Had my share of accidents to make me remember." "That's handy." "Yeah," Danny said. "So, Aim, what did you call me for?" "Right. I was very curious to meet you in person, ever since I saw how you did in the games." "Weren't you supposed to be a part of those for your year?" The half-a raised an eyebrow. "I watched the recordings," Mirio said without missing a beat. "I got very curious, because your quirk can do the similar thing to mine." "You turn intangible, too?" asked Danny. "Well, permeation is what they call it. Sure, I got no flashy attacks or the power of an AC unit, but you don't utilize your quirk to the fullest." The boy gave a goofy smile. "The enemy can't touch me," Danny shrugged, realizing that the boy's expertise concerned that ability first and foremost. "That's what intangibility is for." "You are right, but you are also wrong. There are many ways you can use that power." Danny blinked. "Like? It will be easier to show. I also think this will be a valuable experience for both of us. By trying to best someone with permeation, I can learn to predict what my enemies may try in the future against me." The half-a smirked. "And you will show me some tricks for my own quirk, huh?" "This will be only fair." The boy's ever-present bright smile shone. "We should take the most out of our time and make some tangible progress." "Get it?" Danny cackled. He liked that guy. He still wasn't sure how that basic power could translate to any better fighting ability, but seeing what the boy had in store would not hurt. "Maybe sometime, pal," the half-a said. "I'm kinda busy right now. By the way, have you seen Allmight? Is he here?" "I think he went to do the hero stuff." "Fudge, I guess I'll be on my merry way." "Good luck on your path, then." Mirio saluted dramatically. After that brief but promising exchange, the rest of the day proceeded as normal, with Danny's initial worries slightly numbed. There was no point in pondering on that if Allmight was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the half-a hoped that back home he could find some advice. When Danny got to his apartment building, he didn't bother putting the keys in anything, just lazily going through any obstacle on his path. It was much quicker, and he never was the one to put up with such stupid and restrictive rules. As he neared the doors of Tsukachi's apartment, his hearing was already picking some high octaves from within. Concerned, the half-a opted to use the keys and do so as loud as possible, so as to alert the detective and, evidently, his sister of his arrival. Despite his effort, the rant Makoto was vomiting at Tsukachi did not cease. "They forbid me from employing my own nephew, Naomasa," she exclaimed. "After all the trouble I went through, too. The HPSC doesn't do anything like that for no reason." There must be one, said the detective. Reason my ass. He's free to choose whichever internship he wants. Why don't we ask him, then? Asked Tsukachi and turned towards Danny. I see you got the message. The Hafa turned to Makoto. And I'm not happy about it. What's with this sudden crap? Neither am I, Danny muttered, having endured Bakugou's laughing at him. Dropping his things nearby and falling on the sofa, he tilted his raven-haired head to Tsukachi. And I still don't fully get it. What am I supposed to do now? Well, you did get some offers, Tsukachi responded, digging through the papers on the coffee table. And yours isn't there? Asked Danny, referring to Makoto. Captain Celebrity doesn't want to risk the relations with the Japanese authorities. When you go on that list, it means no overseas trips for you, either. I can't strive for a job, I can't go abroad. Did I owe them money at some point? The Hafa hummed. And in that joke he found some haunting suspicion that the HPSC could be aware of his illegal escapades. That made awfully too much sense. At least you keep chin up. Tsukachi flashed a small smile. As I kept telling Makoto, it's not a bad thing. If anything, it means that you are all but set up in life. Huh? If the highest authority on heroes employs your services, it opens a lot of doors for you. And also puts a leash on me, asked the Hafa. They already left the nasty aftertaste, old man. I don't want my boss to issue me ultimatums each time they want something. A bunch of pricks is who they are. He's got a point, added Makoto. They left the kid with little to no choice. I must be very scary. Danny put hands behind his head. Scary, spooky undead kid. Gee, you take this part seriously, Makoto mumbled. Until I start properly breathing again, your arguments are invalid. Hey, I'm on your side here, Makoto smirked. I am, too, added Tsukachi tiredly. I'm just saying that both of you are over-dramatizing. How exactly are we over-dramatizing? Old man. Danny looked at the ceiling and lazily dropped his arm off the couch. I'm not the one barging into someone's life like an alcoholic father in the midnight. They were obviously in a hurry, hence their crude methods. Perhaps you should take their invitation and talk. An invitation? Danny raised an eyebrow. Nobody told me that part. Yes, after all, they aren't stripping you of any internships. They merely want you to choose them. Old man, they literally scared off the rest. Those are some unfair hiring practices. Anyway, who did send the offers? Well, if you are shooting for the highest, Makoto looked through the papers. Then this one takes the cake. Danny took the list and his eyes widened in surprise. What does Endeavor want with me? Didn't I beat his kid? He scratched his temple. Obviously the guy doesn't hold a grudge. Which is odd. I heard he is exactly the opposite, Makoto responded. He also has the reputation of a number 2 hero, and the one with such impeccable crime-stopping record. It is enough for him to scoff at HPSC recommendations. Recommendations, Danny repeated, wondering if he had heard him correctly. Yes, they are worded in such a manner, meaning that technically the heroes can take you in. Nobody else just wants to go through the trouble. Props to him for bravery, I guess. Don't hurry off and take any offer you see, Danny, Tsukachi warned. HPSC may not openly act against Endeavor over such triviality, but you are not immune to their anger, much less so if you choose another agency. It is better that you go to them and talk this over first. In fact, tomorrow is your day off, so it will be a perfect time to pay a visit. So what? They just are gonna put everything aside just for me. They did contact me as your guardian, so everything is arranged. Danny sighed. And here I looked forward to the weekend. Truth be told, Tsukachi himself was not exactly sure of how to proceed. A year ago, he would have never expected himself in such situation. And a while back, he could only suspect such an outcome, not prepare for it. Thus, in Danny's stead, he was the one to ask his friend Allmight for advice. The number 1 hero was surprised by that knowledge, but came to accept it easily, understanding the hows and whys of HPSC's actions. Still unwilling to let go of his theory, it only made sense to Allmight to continue guiding the Hafa along the path of law and good. Both he and Tsukachi had their suspicions confirmed. Danny's mood took a plummet, so it was up to the boy's guardian to make sure that it would not deteriorate further. However, that part would largely depend on the commission. After the initial frustration was gone, namely the following morning, he was willing to go with the flow until he faced those people. For all he knew, they could just be inconsiderate instead of outright vile, like the bastards in white. Their responsibility was not eradication of supernatural, so they could be negotiated with. Danny assured himself that way. He was more worried and frustrated than angry. The commission's decision would ultimately have an impact on his life in that world. On the road there, Tsukachi advised him to keep cool head, and Danny chose to comply. It even felt somewhat amusing, for even in a world where quirks were common, he still was under scrutiny. Sighing, the half leaned back in his seat, lazily scrolling through the newsfeed his phone. Nothing interesting, huh? Tsukachi tried to continue the conversation. Mostly the usual hero stuff, Danny shrugged. But I recently read about something about Ingenium. And Tsukachi tried to recollect the name. Turbo Hero. I've heard the reports that he was injured. That's it. Danny raised an eyebrow. I have my designated areas, Danny. Some things are beyond my knowledge. You know, the detective flashed a small smile and made a turn. What got you interested, though? He is the brother of one of my classmates, Danny responded seriously. And he wasn't just injured, he is out of commission. By some edgy shithead with a long murder and life-maiming list. The hero killer, the half-amok the title. I know him. Tsukachi's voice turned serious again. 17 kills, 23 heroes left incapacitated. He clarified. Designated as a class villain, bordering on as he isn't your usual criminal, because heroes are his sole targets. Some intricate hatred for them seems to be his motive, so I wouldn't take him lightly if I were you. And his quirk? We don't know, Danny. Tsukachi narrowed his eyes. Don't you dare come after the Edgelord Supreme. Danny asked sarcastically. Don't see you guys moving to arrest him. Because he is dangerous and elusive, responded Tsukachi. Danny, we are in the middle of Commission's investigation into you. Someone sure sets priorities straight, the half-a said. There's a murderous psycho out there, yet a kid is their main goal. If you guys stop trying to control everything and directed effort elsewhere, who knows, maybe All Might can call it a day for once. I'm not starting this debate with you again, Danny. Tsukachi rubbed his temples. Instead of complaining, you should also direct all this energy to being a hero. That's what I am trying to do, Danny grumbled. But your rules keep standing in my way. The detective sighed once more, letting go of the wheel in front of a red light. It seems you never changed your mind on vigilantism. Nope, I am proud of the lives I've saved. It's as I told you every time before, you cannot control it all. And you can't prevent as many deaths because you keep people's hands tied. This whole mechanism is bulky and slow, you can't react in time. Vigilantes can be of help. And what can you even do, Danny? This is a high-rank villain which evaded us for years. You think you can easily track him down and beat him? Tsukachi was getting exasperated. In his denial, Danny was undermining the effort each of his and the Commission's men were making. True, finding him is the main problem. Don't really have the experience with how my villains were pretty on the nose. But he is also 100% weaker than most of them. You mean to say that your town was filled to the brim with A-class villains and didn't get any attention? Danny, you are lying, admit it. I am not. Then how, pray tell, these people came to your place? They were ghosts, Danny exclaimed in frustration, before realizing his slip. For better or worse, the teen saw that Tsukachi was not convinced, and not amused. We are done here, Daniel. The half-ghost narrowed his eyes, but said nothing and looked away. Convincing Tsukachi would be pointless and would put his secret in jeopardy. And besides, what would it really change? Both of them were incredibly stubborn. And if his own sister was unable to change his mind, then what could he, a kid he had picked off the street, do to make the detective see things his way? And Danny would not change his mind, for his past was still in his memory. He remembered how he was the sole protector of his town, how the bureaucratic machine did not want to understand the nuances and simply ordered a genocide Phantom managed one day to prevent. How despite everything he did, the knuckleheads from GIW tried to kill him. True, Danny knew murder is not something the Commission did. But the first woe was already evident. The detective did not want to believe the kid. He did not in fact sense a lie with his quirk, having accused the boy in an emotional outburst. But Danny himself could believe what he was saying. His stories about the past appeared wild, outlandish and odd, yet too well put together to be an on-the-spot lie. But seriously, ghosts, those were not real, and even Danny was not by a child with similar abilities. The detective remembered the atrocious scar the boy had on his chest, the traumatic reaction he had to electricity, the lack of proper heartbeat and breathing, the most evident signs of life, and couldn't help but wonder if his charge actually believed himself to be dead. That thought was more grim than Danny made it appear with his laid-back attitude and jokes. He kept wondering about that part as they drove the rest of the way to the building. It was seemingly like all others around it, just a faceless glass Goliath, with a minor addition of a sign high above. The two of them entered it, passing the security by presenting a signed list of paper and the passport. And in the main hall, they came across a very tired and gaunt-looking person with blonde hair. "You're Tsukachi-san, right?" he asked, his voice as slow and exhausted as his appearance suggested. "It's me," the detective nodded curtly. The man then turned towards the teen. "And you must be Fenton-san," he added and yawned. "Follow me, I'll show you the way." "Geez," Danny mumbled as he followed the man. Can't get a proper sleep, sir. Too much work lumped on me as of late. Their guy was eager to complain. So I don't get much. No. We are somewhat understaffed as of late. That explains a lot, Danny muttered, before being nudged by the detective. Danny, your tongue, he warned, genuinely concerned where the boy's attitude could lead them. Whatever, the overworked man sighed as they entered the elevator. We get this a lot. How bad is it? Asked Tsukachi, professional interest taking over for a moment. The extent is confidential, I'm afraid. Enough to not be able to hide it, I suppose. Danny's expression was a mix of I told you so, and the dryness unseen before on his face. Tsukachi chose to ignore that. Eventually they made it to the office that read the president, and were taken aback. Wait, we are talking to the president about it? Tsukachi asked in surprise. Just how serious is this? I don't know. But you are not going in, Tsukachi-san. President's order. She wants to talk to the boy. Tsukachi's eyes widened. I'm not sure this is. I'll be fine. Old man, Danny gave a devilish grin. Let's see what they want from me. Can always shoot up the place. He saw the look of their guide. Just kidding, sheesh, the half-a huffed. You can wait in my office, Tsukachi-san. It's just down the corridor. The detective sighed. Be watchful of what you say, Danny, he gave one final advice, before seeing his charge enter the office with a smirk on his face. On the inside, the half-a immediately took a look around the spacious room, confused about why it was so poorly lit despite the window in its far end, behind the desk at which a middle-aged, stern-looking blonde woman sat. Near her was a tall and gruff-looking man, perhaps her secretary. Wow, that's not ominous at all, Danny muttered, before coughing. It was time for his usual method of dealing with pressure. He smirked. Good morning, ma'am, sir, the half-a greeted. The officials were obviously not amused with half-casual greeting. Not their native one at that. Fenton-san, we have watched your performance during the games. Quite admirable if I say so myself, take a. She didn't finish the sentence as the half-a already sat on a chair in front of her. Let's skip the pleasantries, Danny responded, his look becoming cold despite his smile. Especially since I have none to give back. Really? The woman raised an eyebrow. And how did we earn the scorn of an adolescent? Come on, you know why. You guys basically scared off my potential employers. Of course I have nothing good to say about you yet. Listen, kid. The president raised her hand and the secretary fell silent. They all react in a similar manner, she reminded him. The boy is just more vocal about it. This is no excuse to behave in such a manner. Why did you invite me anyway? Asked Danny. You have no armed people here, no heroes. So you don't see me as a threat, he observed. You have no way of knowing that, the secretary rebutted. The second we entered this floor, my invisible clone rummaged through the rooms and even in the walls. The coffee machine in the left office is broken, by the way. The expression of the secretary made it all worth it in the half-a's eyes. That was a lie. Danny hadn't learned to think this far ahead. But the man was surprisingly an open book, which was odd, given his position near a stone-faced lady. You are right, Fenton-san. We have no plans of attacking or detaining you. We are also defenseless within this room, faced by a child who can break apart this whole building from what we have observed. We show you enough trust and goodwill now, and we hope you can appreciate it. Danny narrowed his eyes. Doesn't mean I trust you people. This is a strange attitude for someone in your position. You are training to be a hero, are you not? We are bound to be allies. You obviously read everything you could find on me. I don't need to answer why, but we would like to hear your side of the story. My side. It is my side, basically. I was a vigilante, and people like you never did anything useful. That's pretty much it. But we are not them. We are across the continent, in fact. Tell me, Fenton-san, why did you even start your training as a hero? You must have been aware of regulations we have here. I was not, Danny shrugged. I was just offered to use my powers for something I can do, so I accepted. I'm not much good in anything else. Each job comes with rules, Fenton-san. I know, just like office plankton cannot make scans of their butts. Heroes can't move without your permission, right? This is not that extreme. Pro-heroes are autonomous, we are simply the coordinators. It is the students which we carefully observe. Oh, so maybe one of my classmates is here. Danny looked back over his shoulder. Nope, number 2 would have been loud enough. You are simply an intriguing case, and we take interest in such peculiarities, also. Your quirk has so many applications, young one. Yes, and I decide what to do with it, Danny said with all seriousness. I chose to help people, and this should be enough. It is not that simple. I study at a hero school. Danny leaned forward, alongside other students who are not being summoned here against their will. If anything, you are the ones who make it difficult. What's your problem with me anyway? We don't have a problem. In fact, we invited you here to grant you an internship, Fenton-san. The half stared at the woman, wondering if he had heard her correctly. So that's actually the reason. I'll tell you the same thing I told Tsukachi-san, I'm not interested. So just let me get an internship where I want it. This is not an offer you can easily refuse like that, kid, said the secretary. This is a guaranteed career after you are done with the school. Yes, career is your lapdog, Danny responded. Or what? You do this out of a kindness of your heart. We do this because your potential is extreme, and we have need of someone like a hero you may grow into, Fenton-san. No, you don't, the halfer responded. You don't need a hero like me, I'm sure. That's why you want to get control over what I do. Greater control than what you have over other heroes. President had to commend the boy for his paranoia-like suspicions that were not so detached from the truth. She did want that control, as he could be a valuable asset of HPSC, one that had to be nourished as early as possible. Certainly, the boy was much older than Hawks back in the day, but still a student. While his past vigilantism had been a pointer towards his woes with the law, she still had hopes that a child in a somewhat similar position would be if not just as, but almost as amicable to the offer. Turns out, Danny was stubborn and could hold a grudge. This is an exaggeration. While it is true that being employed by us has certain unique aspects, we are not imposing anything extraordinary on you. Then explain to me what it entails, Danny shrugged. We will simply assign you to one of our close associate heroes for starters. We will also prepare a training regimen for you to follow. And like that you've lost me, Danny interrupted, yawning theatrically. Tsukachi's past advice was long forgotten. President was getting annoyed by the boy's attitude. She could not show it, and just what seems to be the problem. This regimen will be unique and adequate to your quirk and our type of missions. The school does the same thing. You piling even more shit on me will only make me resemble your poor guide man. You really thought this job will be an easy ride. The secretary spat. To be honest, I just don't like you and won't hear anything. But so far, yes, it was an easy ride. Danny tilted his head and smiled. If you let your preconceived notions stop you from growing, then you will be a very subpar hero. President Lady allowed herself some visible negative emotions. Let me tell you something. Back in the day I was continuously getting offers from a guy that wanted to train me. After all, our powers are not that different, and each time I told him no because I knew what piece of crap he was. I am not going back on who I am just for power's sake. The sooner you learn it, the better. Think of the lives you can save with that power, attained not from a villain, but from other heroes. Courtesy of your rules, I can't save any lives until I'm out of the school. And because of you, I can't even do it during the internships. You don't care about saving lives, you called me for your own interests. Our interests and that of civilians align. President narrowed her eyes. The petulant child is not to lecture us on how to run things. Am I wrong, though? Danny asked, unshaken by her glare. I already told you that no, I'm not working with you. By refusing, you prevent yourself from an important part of education. By you existing, I'm being denied that, Danny spat back. I did get a couple of offers, still. I may not like Endeavor much, based on what I heard, but I may just take his offer now. Listen here, you little brat. President once again stopped her secretary. Let's do it this way, Fenton-san. What do you need to accept our offer? What does Endeavor have that we don't? Admittedly, there is one difference. He is not you. Granted, he might turn out to be a sack of shit, too, but that's up in the air. President sighed. I didn't wish to resort to this. Do you know of someone named Pariah, boy? And at that Danny froze. His worst fear had just been confirmed. No idea. What does this have to do with anything? Some of the criminals who attacked UA were all too eager to point at your photo and tell us a lot of interesting things. So that's what you were doing for a living before Eraserhead caught you. I was a penniless bum. I didn't even kill anyone, Danny said through his teeth. You still broke the law. Furthermore, you never even chose to inform the authorities, the secretary stated. We can declare you a criminal right now, added President. So threats it is, Danny mumbled. And you will be standing in one room with a criminal. It will be quite unfortunate. It will. That's why we suggest that you don't make it worse for anyone and keep a cool head. Danny sighed and rubbed his temples. As damn expected, people who talked only in ultimatums gave him another one. The Haffa was pissed, and his eyes glowed, making President instinctively reach for a button under her table. Wiping his face slowly, Danny took a deep, thoughtful breath. All right, I don't have much of a choice, it seems. But we will do it on my conditions. What makes you think you can give any? That train is gone now, the secretary responded. None of us wants to make another side go nuts, you said so. I can still kill you with a flick of my hand. And you will also lose any chance of me working for you even if I don't. So, let's make a proper deal then. What's your conditions then? Danny hummed. First, ditch that training bull. Your pet hero can give the rundown of what you need. 2. My arena adventure stays between us. Acceptable. President responded, knowing that saving the recourses meant for training would do them good in the end. And finally, I can't bear seeing your mugs for too long. I agree to spend half of the internship time with your hero. Another one I'll spend with a hero of my choosing. It's too late for offers now, the secretary said. Although you have probably set your mind on the existing one already, he huffed. You show signs of intelligence. Danny smiled at the angry expression. President hummed. It wasn't much, but every journey began with a first step, and even that would give them limited control over what the boy did. And by the time the boy got his provisional license, the situation would be much different. Internships usually took only a part of the week. Technically, Danny could sacrifice some more free time to another internship. It was a very strange arrangement, but President was confident that eventually Endeavor's short temper would be malcontent with the boy's lack of concentration and perhaps tiredness, and eventually the entirety of time would be theirs. Very well, Fenton-san, you have yourself an arrangement. To say that Todoroki felt strange was to say nothing. All along the path to his father's agency he was perplexed by several important conundrums. What would he say to Endeavor when they met on the latter's territory? How should he act when faced by that man's arrogance and blindness? That and many other questions plagued the boy's mind. Another one of them was quite simplistic in nature, and that was why he was being followed by his class president. For too long their paths through the city were absolutely similar, with Danny trailing behind, too absorbed in his own thoughts to call more attention to himself. Fenton-san, don't you have your own internship? Todoroki finally managed to ask. Danny blinked. Oh, didn't I tell you? He asked and tilted his head. I was offered a spot at Endeavor's place, so I took it. The human teen stared at his classmate wide-eyed, before returning to his usual apathetic expression. I wonder what made him so interested. Someone is being rude, Danny smirked. I'm not sure myself, but it was the best offer of the few I got, so, he shrugged. I can't imagine what the rest of them was like. Not the best picks, I admit. Wait, did you just make a joke? No, you definitely did. Danny lightly nudged him. Not a second into the internship and I'm already rubbing off on you. Todoroki sighed. Admittedly, Fenton was not the worst companion he could have. Bakugou would have taken that spot, but he was currently under the guidance of the number 4 hero, the highest one that took interest in him. While Todoroki had no animosity towards the blonde, the latter would certainly have made it difficult. Danny was quite alright in Todoroki's book, the memory of their interactions during the festival still fresh in his mind. He could, after all, relate to his situation to some extent. Did you learn the reason you got so few offers? Other than racism and unwillingness to intern a foreigner, I cannot tell, I am afraid. Although your dad must know. He still chose to invite me despite that other reason. And if he is the one to spill the beans, not my fault. Danny smirked and winked. Unfortunately, he picked the worst person to give a clue to. He soon realized that when they finally faced Endeavor's agency, a colossal dark skyscraper with the man's insignia above the entrance. Danny whistled after witnessing the living proof of the man's ego with his own eyes. Wow, you think he is compensating for something? The Haffa asked and looked at his classmate. Compensating for what? Todoroki asked in genuine confusion. Metaphorical ellipsis appeared near Danny's head as he processed the situation. You know, forget I said anything. He paused. I also referred to Hisdi. A stranger accidentally bumping into him was what stopped the Haffa from insinuating further. Todoroki ignored the antics of his classmate, leading the way inside. Despite this being his first internship, the teen was quite aware of where to go. His father had been rather clear with his instructions. Danny decided to trust the human on that, scanning the surroundings with a degree of curiosity. After all, coming here was his voluntary choice, so by default he was more interested in what he was seeing. It was also his first visit to an actual hero agency, and he wondered how everything worked around there. He had honestly expected a mix of a Batcave and a fire department, taking training and equipment parts from the former, and the alarms for quick reaction of the latter. But from what little he was seeing at the moment, Danny was frankly unimpressed. He sure saw the direction signs for a gym and the like, but the rest, outside of remarkable and imposing decor, was nothing remarkable. Another observation was also made, how spacious every single room was, and it truly was the nightmare of an agoraphobic person. The two students made it to the offices, and honestly, one would have to run a marathon to go from one end to another. And in the end opposite from the entrance, the large imposing doors beckoned, evidently the place where the big guy himself resided. Definitely compensating, Danny mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. Hey, look, his hearing caught some whispers. The chef's kid is here. Huh? We are actually having Fenton, too. Another psychic asked. Sheesh, we are rocking this year round. Come on, Todoroki told the Hafa. We'll have a talk. Danny pulled a smile on his face. Lead the way, he shrugged. Coming up to the doors, the two of them entered Endeavor's abode. Built in the same style as the rest, the overly spacious room contained only the working desk and the set of a table and chairs in the middle. To receive visitors, no doubt. There, at the desk, the flame hero himself sat, wearing his fiery costume. Bet the smoke alarms don't work in this place, Danny whispered, trying to lift the mood. Did you say something? Asked Endeavor, looking up from the papers and rising from his seat. I just wondered if it is comfortable working with flammable materials like this. The Hafa tried to put it lightly. Endeavor huffed. I control my fire just fine. An arrogant smile appeared on his face as he looked at his son. I have been waiting for you, Shoto. It seems you are finally ready to take the path of the mighty, huh? I have no intention of going down the path you made. I'm here to make my own. Oh, well, you should get ready, for we are going out. And what do I do? Danny asked. You are coming along, too, Fenton, Endeavor told him. But I don't see the suit with you. I have one on the go, if you remember, Danny said, as his eyes flashed with neon green. Quick reaction is important, Endeavor said curtly. Then prepare yourself. We're moving out immediately. I'll show you what a hero is. To where? Asked Shoto. If the recent incident follows precedent, then the hero killer will appear in Hasu City again. We will go there on a trip and work there, said Endeavor and opened the door out of the office. Contact Hasu City immediately, he ordered to his subordinates. Todoroki turned to his classmate, who had a wide grin on his face. Looks like I hit a jackpot, the Hafa said, excitement evident on his face. That's what Danny had come for. A piece of some real hero action, not whatever bullshit the commission wanted him to do. The Hafa wanted to put down that bastard. And now he was getting his chance, although his input would probably be less than what he desired, with how he was still an intern. His radiant enthusiasm contradicted Todoroki's cold pragmatism, for he had no love for his father, evidently. However, he knew there was a lot to learn from the hero who had risen so high, and it was also what his mother wished for him. From his thoughts he was snapped out by the Hafa, who in the bright flash switched to his ghost persona. Let's not keep that bozo waiting. Danny grinned toothily and stretched his muscles. It turned out that having a lot of psychics and employees allowed to move around with free hands, with luggage and all possible equipment transported by those who were suddenly sent out on a business trip. Danny enjoyed the fact that he had little to no luggage, other than his daily needs. Internships meant living near the place of said learning, too, and it was partially the reason why the commission was devilishly rubbing their hands in anticipation. 2 internships meant long commuting, and in case of Endeavor and another hero, it was over 1,000 kilometers worth of commuting. The HPSC really wanted him to either faint from exhaustion or accept their terms, but he would push himself and waste hours of his life daily just blasting from one end of the country to another. He would not let them win. The trip to Hasu shaved off a couple of minutes, admittedly, but it still made him wonder. Say, Endeavor-san. Danny turned away from the window of the car, which they, for the lack of Shoto's ability to fly, employed. He thus broke the awkward silence. Just to clarify, you were told about my situation, right? The man spared him a look. That you will be here only every other day. Yes, so I was told. Shoto raised an eyebrow. Why do you have such schedule? He asked his classmate. Can't tell, or I will go to the naughty corner, Danny sighed. Yet ... you still agreed, Endeavor-san. Why so? I have my reasons, the man responded curtly. We can still manage without an extra intern. Oof, right in the feels. Danny theatrically put a hand over his heart. Still, thanks for bearing with that. It's not like I'm slacking, after all. Unlike with the commission, this time he was watchful of what he said in front of the hero, lest he antagonized him in any way. Danny had decided that he would do anything to finish that internship, even if it meant biting his tongue more than a few times in the future. Spare the excuses, Endeavor raised his palm. Sheesh, no wonder Todoroki is so quiet most of the time. It was one thing having an internship with a guy like that. It must have been even more difficult living under the same roof. Danny's own parents were the opposite. Always loud, talkative, and largely uncaring of what he did until it was too grave, or until the moments of enlightenment when they remembered how little time they spent near their children and actually tried to do something about it. Tsukachi was better in the whole parenting department, Danny had to admit. The man was never too absorbed in his work not to help him over any trivial matter, and Danny was thankful for that, even if they didn't see eye to eye on many things. The detective had been surprised when he heard of the Hafa's future internships, as in plural, and like a responsible guardian he had warned that such schedule would be bad for the boy's health and advised to pick one, unaware of the ultimatum and subsequent compromise. Danny hadn't wanted Tsukachi to know of the arena, perhaps more so than anyone else. Not because he had fears of being ousted, he knew he could handle himself. But he didn't want to disappoint him in such a manner, and didn't want the history to repeat itself. It was partially the reason why his arena matches eventually came to a halt even before USJ incident. He still kept the money for a rainy day. Danny wanted to talk to Shoto, so inconsiderate he was not to have done so beforehand. But he certainly couldn't do that in the tight confinement of the car. It was spacious, sure, but doubtfully anything would be out of Endeavor's earshot. And Shoto wasn't here to chat with his old man, obviously. The trip was largely spent in silence, and Danny couldn't bear the atmosphere. He needed something to talk about, and he found that something. So we got anything on Stain. An idea where to look. I have already sent an inquiry to the local PD. We will first gather as much information as we can. He goes only after heroes, right? Asked Danny. There must be some pattern to his kills. Endeavor nodded. That is why we are going to Hasu City. Too many murders happen there, so he is evidently operating there. That's not what I meant, Danny responded. Maybe there are some particular kinds of heroes he goes after first. Maybe he hates those who take kittens off the trees rather than those who help grannies cross the street. Take this seriously, Fenton, Endeavor ordered. I am serious, Danny assured. My question is, at least, he doesn't kill everyone, after all. Something made him injure Ingenium instead of chopping him up. That was a good observation to make, Endeavor had to admit. He had come to the same conclusion long ago, but Fenton could make those too. The boy could prove himself worthy for what he had in store for him. That whole internship was but a test, where Endeavor wished to observe Fenton and get enough of a sway. But his usual charming personality wasn't making it easier, nor did he plan to make it easy for himself even. So far little pattern exists. Some of the murdered heroes were suspected of several behind-the-scenes schemes, but nothing else seems to connect them. Rumors probably exist about every hero, Danny sighed. This isn't much of a help. Yes, Endeavor nodded. However, I have determined one pattern that man follows. His massacre in Hasu is confined towards certain areas, and only after he is finished with one, disposing of heroes there, he goes to the next. So we are gonna patrol the area of attack on Ingenium and try finding him. Danny asked. That will be a start until we gather more clues and information, Endeavor declared firmly. In fact, Danny did have one, but he doubted that a pro hero would approve of it. He also needed privacy for that. I see, Danny said and looked outside again. It was undeniably some new and useful experience for him. In the past, his enemies were either loud enough to be spotted in an instant or could not hide from his ghost sense. This time he was actually a part of an actual investigation, and he decided that his choice had been the right one. The process itself was largely uneventful after that. At that moment Danny decided that the role of a sidekick was not something he desired. Because, well, they were largely errand boys and girls, tasked with setting up a small base of operations in the chosen place of staying. That was not something he looked towards, but they didn't seem to mind, so to each their own, he supposed. Endeavor himself brought 2 boys alongside him, so that they could see him use his name and authority to convince the local heroes and officials to let him continue investigating. It was mostly him very forcibly saying that he could handle the matter. Endeavor clearly wasn't the most sociable person, but at least he was confident during such conversations, and it was something Danny hoped to pick up and consistently utilize. It was also during such boring stuff that Danny quietly slipped away, telling Shoto that he went to the toilet. In reality, after entering a toilet cabin, Danny used his powers to get outside, where he wouldn't be spotted, and then took out his phone and dialed a number he had memorized instead of saving in contacts. And after a couple of rings, the phone was picked up. Yeah, who's that? Hello, Jurin, Danny spoke. A couple of minutes. Wait, no shitting way. That you, Danny boy? The broker spoke in surprise. He had clearly watched the games. Didn't expect to hear from you anytime soon. To be honest, I didn't expect calling you either. How's the hero gig working out for you? Asked Jurin. Decently. This is a business call, by the way. What business can you possibly have with me? Not that I'm complaining. I need information, Jurin. You are selling it, aren't you? Depends on the kind of info. You know I keep it to myself when it concerns my clients. Company policy. What do you know about Stain? For some time no sounds came from the other side, as the man was obviously considering this. Stain, are you actually going after that nutcase? Do the big guys know about this talk? No, they don't. I appreciate the underworld contacts. Jurin, you appreciate the investment, so we will keep this cooperation a secret, Danny smirked. So, I'll need some time to gather what I can. Stain is famous, but not much is known about him. Not much is known to me, either. Figures, Danny sighed. Alright, I'll be waiting for a call. Upon returning to Endeavor and Shoto, he was wondering what was in store. Endeavor knew that Stain's attacks could take place any time of day, so there was no point in waiting. And instead, having the permission of local heroes, as he was basically doing their job, he would stop a crime or two while he was at it. Yet, they turned out to be such small fries that Endeavor put them down without Danny or Shoto having a chance to take part. Man, he is quick about this, the Hafa commented, seeing the flame hero hand over the beaten criminal to the police. He was impressed, but inevitably bored. Endeavor was just doing his usual job, making the trainees just sit on the sidelines and watch, taking notes. That wasn't exactly what the Hafa wanted of this internship. I suppose he is different from what you are used to. You mean how I kept mocking you guys instead of grinding you into the ground? Danny raised an eyebrow and shrugged. I guess we are different. I recall my sister saying something about coping mechanisms, but meh, I don't really care. What do you have to cope with? I dunno. Wasn't really listening to her because she can be tedious. Still love her, the Hafa smirked. Since she is probably the only sane member of our dysfunctional family, he chuckled. Shoto looked at him for a moment before glancing at Endeavor, who was routinely answering the questions of the press. Your parents disowned you, right? Asked the human teen. Good memory you have. Yep, like the jackasses that they are. But you are treating this as a joke. Danny cackled. If we treat everything as a national emergency, we'll be pretty much like your old man. Or wither like grape under the sun and turn into paranoidal and tired raisins. I ain't telling you to just laugh all your problems away. Like, I still despise my folks. And raisins. There won't be jokes if we meet again. At least good-natured ones. Did they talk to you after that time? Nope. I sent Jazz the recording of my performance. But I don't know if they saw it, and honestly, I don't care much for them. It's been months since then. I made myself at home here. At this point, I don't think I'll even consider returning to their house. Shoto nodded. Fenton's approach to the delicate matter of a broken family appeared very different from his. That seemed to be the trend for everything the star student did. Still, he felt like he could add something to the table. Maybe you should talk to them. Still, said Shoto, glancing at his father. This may not be the time or place to advise. Hey, I gave you one. And it wasn't the place either. Danny gave a small smirk before it slipped. You aren't the first. Atop of that, there can be a lot of things that weren't said, misunderstandings and the rest. It feels like your parting was this way. Oh, they did say a lot of things about the abomination in place of their child. All right, Danny sighed. It helped me a lot to make certain decisions, Shoto continued. It may be of use to you, too. The Hafa hummed thoughtfully. Now is not the time for a family reunion. Anyhow, he chose to end that part of the discussion on that. He had, after all, a very busy schedule ahead of him. Danny departed for Kyushu early in the morning, careful not to wake up his roommate. He was going without any luggage, partially because the flight was going to be extremely speedy. He wasn't allowed to utilize duplicates to work 2 internships at once, but at least that leeway was granted to the half-ghost. Probably because it could be even more tiring to fly across half the country on his own. Nonetheless, the Hafa didn't waste any time, especially since he had set a meeting before he left Tokyo area. Jiren was waiting for him in a random location, and that was the best time for a meeting. Displeased as the man was to be up so early in the morning, he still provided the tits and bits of the info he had managed to accumulate, and Danny paid him enough for that small service. From his arena retirement fund, what he heard and what he was reading during the flight did help him alleviate some fog. Those were mostly rumors and interesting observations Jiren had made. The notes said that Stain's modus operandi and weapon choice resembled a particular vigilante from a while back. It was a speculation that wasn't much of help, but since Stain was a lone wolf who didn't interact with the underworld, Jiren could only do that much. Still, some trails did make it to the report of that conniving spider. Jiren chose to make it more substantive by bringing up the mysterious vigilante Stendhal. That man, whether or not he and Stain were the same person, had been busying himself with murdering several villains, and Danny felt sick once more, for to his mind, the likes of villains that were killed didn't deserve such treatment. That made him willing to believe in the connection. Unfortunately, the reason for a switch of targets eluded both Phantom and Jiren. The hero killer made his debut in Naruhata, Stendhal's place of operation. But the start of the man's career didn't fit the conclusion Endeavor had made, for Naruhata had not been ransacked by a crazy murderer. Still, the rest fit the bill, so the first tries must have been the test of skill. Danny tried to draw a pattern in his head, but each time he could only think of the man as a psycho who was just waiting to stab another hero with no primary consideration. That was not very reassuring. And now that he thought of it, Endeavor's public appearance could make it more difficult, for the pompous hero killer could be reluctant to jump number 2 hero and could also hide somewhere until the flame hero left. The dilemma he would have to address to Endeavor next when he returned. Until then, he would have to bear the company of whatever hero the commission had picked for him. He was hopeful that that part of the internship was not going to be a very curated and tedious experience. After all, the man was just one place behind Endeavor. He should have been at the very least competent. Eventually, as the morning sun was already shining over the country, Danny made it to the westernmost island of the Big Four. Fortunately, he didn't feel much of a toll of a lengthy journey, even if it was admittedly there. Hopefully a proper breakfast could fix it. The half aside as he flew lower, wondering if the city was the correct one. He stopped midair and unfolded a map he had been keeping beneath his suit, alongside Jurin's notes. Pockets were not very reliable when you flew with the speed of a plane. Danny made sure to fly in a straight line, but even a 1-degree turn at such a distance could prove to be a setback. And as Danny looked for the pointers, he suddenly heard a voice call him out. Violating the airspace, eh? Danny slowly leaned back and upside down, until he saw that a person was flying near him. Unlike the half-ghost, the blonde man was using a pair of huge crimson feathery wings. Dressed in aviator's outfit, he was obviously prepared for the downsides of remaining up in the air. Didn't see any signs around here. Danny shrugged and faced him normally. The man smirked. "You must be Fenton," he commented. "Didn't expect you to come so early. And you are Hawks, huh?" Danny tilted his head. "Well, your boss set up a tight schedule. Not really any way around it. The president may be quite demanding." The man examined the Haffa. "She isn't really my chef. So you are a go-to-errand boy." Danny raised an eyebrow. "Are those the famed career opportunities I'm being told about?" he asked, at which Hawks chuckled. To put it simply, he responded in an easygoing manner, before pointing towards the nearest roof. "Let's continue the talk there." Danny complied with the request, wondering about the initial impression he was getting. So far he wasn't seeing enough to draw conclusions. As they landed, Hawks put hands behind his head. "All right, kiddo. What approach are we picking? We be straight or keep smiling to each other?" he asked. Danny huffed. "I was forced to come." "Same deal here," Hawks smirked. "When the commission asks you, you can't really refuse." "Oh, I saw it firsthand," Danny answered. "So you weren't a volunteer either." "I'm not really interested in being a mama bird. I don't take interns either, but," he sighed dramatically, "guess we both will have to roll with it." There was a flick of mutual sympathy between the two, as either found themselves in an unwanted position. "Before it gets awkward," Danny crossed his hands. "Maybe we should get going." Hawks clicked his tongue. "Right you are, Fenton. I first have to ask, though. You used to be a vigilante, right?" "For a year, yes. Around 4 or 5 villain encounters a day," Danny recollected. "So I was busy." Hawks stared at the boy in front of him. That was an impressive feat, considering that Fenton probably had a civilian life and secret identity atop of that. "Then I guess you do have an experience with fighting," the hero hummed thoughtfully. "We'll just go through my routine and beat villains if we need to. I want to see how you do in the real environment." Danny shrugged. "It beats receiving a lecture. Let's do this." Hawks smiled and nodded. "It could be worse," he reasoned. The boy could be uncooperative to the extreme. But instead he must have accepted the hand he had been dealt. The boy's quirk really made it more convenient, especially for airborne patrols. The two of them soon took it to the air above the city. Danny hummed and floated as close to the pro as he could, with feathery wings standing in the way. "So how do you know if there is a crime down below?" the Haffa asked. "Same way as usual," Hawks shrugged. "I listened to the police and looked below for a big boom." "How did you do it, then?" "Well, I did tap into the police communications," the Haffa admitted. "But the town wasn't big, the villains were loud, and I usually could spot them with my extra sense wherever they hid." "What kind of sense can pinpoint a location like this?" asked Hawks curiously. "I ain't telling. Confidential info," responded the Haffa. "But it won't work here, I bet. Unless a villain uses particular quirk. Some of them trigger that sense." "For shame," Hawks sighed dramatically again. "It could save us so much time. Anyway, you hungry, kid?" "I didn't have breakfast yet." "If you are the one paying," Danny seized the opportunity, making the hero laugh. "He is already extorting me." "Don't sweat it, the stuff is on me." Hawks took the Haffa to a random place for some rice omelets. In general, the Haffa was so far getting a pleasant impression. He had expected the commission's agent to be stricter and obnoxious, just like the rest of the organization was. Fortunately, it didn't seem to be the case, and half of his internship would not be wasted on something irrelevant. Hawks scratched his chin as he looked at the boy in front of him. He had been surprised when the commission dumped that duty on him, even more so about their choice. The president told him that the boy's tremendous power could be used for the benefit of society, but Hawks had caught the subliminal message. She sought to make Fenton another agent of the commission, and his resourcefulness could truly make him indispensable. And his shady background was a testament that the boy was not a shining knight, contrary to his hero outfit. It concealed readiness to go to any lengths if it could aid him in his goals, noble they might have been. So, he was already partially prepared to what the commission would want of him. That, however, was not something Hawks could disclose on the first day. "All right, you done there, kid?" he asked. "Pretty much," Danny smirked. "Thanks for the meal. Don't mention it. Now let's see here." Hawks turned on an earpiece. Then, his expression said it all. "Looks like we already have a job. Keep up, kid." Danny nodded with determination. He had to admit, this part of internship was winning in quantity of crimes already. When the two of them were outside, Hawks immediately took to the skies, and the half followed immediately. "Forgot to ask," the pro called out for him. "What's your hero name? Calling you a kid all the time will get old very fast." "It's Phantom." "All right, Phantom, we've got a situation with captives. The villains broke into a hospital, so we are talking about many people held hostage. Time to make yourself more than a hole in my wallet." Hawks smirked. "Do you have experience with this sort of missions?" "Not really," Danny admitted. "It's usually a single villain that could be taken away from civilians." "Yes, but this is a different situation. We don't know how many villains there are, and if they see us act, some heads will fly." "Got it. So what should I do?" "Normally I'd want to rush in myself, but ... you have everything we need for reconnaissance. Bad guys don't know about you being here yet, we can use it." Danny smirked and turned invisible. "I can beat them up, you know." "Don't try it yet," Hawks responded. "There's always someone you can miss. Someone who escapes or someone who kills a bystander to save their pelt. I'd like to take care of it soon, but we should stop and think first. They haven't even issued their demands yet, so we still have time." "Don't start a fight, Phantom." The half aside dramatically. "Very well. Not going all Batman on them, got it. Who's never mind. I'll need their numbers and locations. Remember their quirks if you see any as well." Soon Hawks landed on the ground near a large white building to converse with the police. Danny, without turning visible again, flew inside the building. He remembered the advice given to him on the way about such acts of crime. The villains would want to gather all captives in a single spot to make watching them easier. As Danny searched the different wards, he couldn't help but think that the degree of trust in him was strangely high. His screw-up could mean deaths, and Hawks knew that, still opting to send in an intern. Not that Phantom minded this, of course. It was his chance to prove himself in the field. People thought of vigilantes as self-serving scoundrels. He would be glad to change that perception. One step at a time. Maybe the people had to learn of his vigilantism first. The half mentally went over the list of places spacious enough to hold many people, and soon made his way inside the cafeteria, where he hit a jackpot. His guess was correct, and indeed there were terrified people on the floor, surrounded by a group of thugs, some of whom had firearms. Danny counted 10 of them in that room, but there could be more. This number was enough to keep the unarmed civilians in check. The half chose to eavesdrop on the conversation of thugs that weren't actively watching the captives. "So why are we stuck watching them? I'd take watching the veggies on life support over this, too. Not like they can run off." "Yeah, why are watching them, exactly? Dumbass, we need every captive alive until shit goes down, or the police and Hawks will come in guns blazing before we're set up." So Hawks was right, there were people out of Danny's sight, too. He needed to scout more areas and possibly find the boss of their gang. It would make the job easier. The Haffa had no visual pointers, so he would have to look for a guy who gave orders left and right. Phantom was about to leave, but then he saw something harrowing. On the walls all around him he saw small rectangular packages that could be only one thing. That whole place was rigged with explosives, and one of the thugs was laying down even more. Danny wished he knew how to disarm them, for if he simply carried them away, it would be noticed. Back in the day, when Phantom was new to the world and meddled with electrical villains' plans, it was just one inattentive thug. Shaking his head, the invisible hero slipped back into the corridor. What he was wondering about was why exactly would those people come after a hospital? What did they seek to achieve? It was not a bank to be robbed. It was not even a place with that many potential captives, like, for instance, a theater or a shopping center. Unbeknownst to him, Hawks was thinking the same thing. The pro-hero soon realized that it probably was not about what the criminals could attain from the authorities with threats of violence. A distraction, perhaps. At this thought, Hawks asked the police to keep him informed about any other crime that took place nearby in case his suspicions were correct. The Haffa in the meantime counted a couple more thugs who kept watching the corridors of the relatively small hospital. but there was still no sign of their boss. Choosing instead to inform Hawks of what he had already found, the Haffa exited the building. He spotted the pro as he was talking to the police officer. Flying close, but not dropping his invisibility, Danny smirked. Got a minute. Hawks turned around, but saw nothing. Yet, he realized what was going on. We'll chat later. The hero smiled at the confused officer, who went to keep the crowd of onlookers in check. Alright, Phantom, tell me what you found. 15 thugs at the very least. Most of them are in the cafeteria on the second floor. They also took the whole terrorist part seriously, because the whole room is rigged with explosives. Hawks's look became grim. This complicates the matter. Can you do anything about it? I am not number 2. Explosives aren't my field of expertise. The pro hummed. Anything else? I can't find their boss. I tried eavesdropping. I even possessed a couple and asked a question directly, but none of them even knows. And they still haven't issued their demands. Hawks mumbled, before his eyes widened. Or maybe there just isn't any. You mean no boss? Someone had to organize this shitshow. Yes, but they don't have to be here themselves. In that case, we can't wait for them to pull the trigger. Then let's beat them up finally. I can show the way. The bombs, kid, Hawks reminded slowly. We have to do something about that first. At this, Danny hummed. The hero was right. There had to be a way to get the civilians away from the explosives and armed thugs. He could come to them and form a dome while taking down the criminals. But the explosion would take down the entire room and everything will crumble. Then, the Haffa was struck by an idea. Hey, bird brain, Danny called out the hero. I've got a plan. Is the name calling necessary? Hawks whined slightly. Spill it. I can save those in the cafeteria. You should take care of the ones watching the comatose. 3rd floor, left side. I can fly in there, Hawks nodded. But what do you plan to do with the others? The bad guys won't know what even happened. Danny's eyes gleamed with mischief. It's true that I can't take the bombs away, but I can take the civilians away from bombs. By turning the floor intangible, I'll make them all fall on the floor below. That's 3 meters. Someone will get injured if nobody is there to catch them. I'll head there. Danny blinked. Yeah. He flushed in embarrassment at his cluelessness. What should I do then? You should come with me so that we can pull the rescue off. But the rest, I can do both. Danny smirked and snapped his fingers, creating another invisible duplicate. One will take care of the villains. Another me will accompany you. A voice came from the opposite direction. Huh, was all Hawk said. The duplicates also share the same consciousness, so it can work as a radio too. Both Danny's smirked. I see how you functioned as a vigilante, the pro hero huffed. Alright, Mr. Swiss Knife, let's do this. Not a moment too soon the pro and his very visible companion broke through the front door. When it came to Hawks, the villains expected the winged hero to come from above, and they prepared to face Hawks, not someone who was currently on the upper floors. That role was filled by another phantom that loudly broke through the window. He lazily swiped his finger and left the nearest villains weaponless, before in a split second lunging forth and knocking them out. His knowledge of the area made him aware that in 1, 2, 3. Arg, the villain that ran around the corner was blasted into the wall behind him. Yes, Phantom knew where those small fries were. However, in the couple of minutes he had been outside, some things could change, and they definitely did. Danny rounded the corner himself, before the sounds of gunfire filled the corridor. Summoning a shield, he easily blocked the bullets and jumped into the floor. He landed right atop another villain, whose head was greeted by the marble tile. Phantom did not waste a second flying forward, and a bit higher, emerging back on the required floor, behind the armed squad. Boo, the Haffa said, before his eyes turned ice blue. That was too easy, they didn't even use quirks. And they weren't ready for a half-ghost to join the party. Meanwhile, the other Danny actually had little to do. Hawks' wings were not for show, evidently. On the contrary, he launched his feathers at speeds that made them as dangerous as throwable knives. Hawks was dispatching villains quickly, the Haffa had to keep up, for there wasn't any time for them to waste. Didn't mean that the half-ghost didn't have anything to do, just that this duplicate's takedown count was much smaller. 2 of them should come from the left corridor, Danny casually warned, before firing a blast in that direction. Hawks threw another feather that hit both opponents and pinned them to the wall. After the explosion the blast had caused. These count as mine, the Haffa quipped. This isn't a competition, Hawks said, before pausing. I'm still in the lead, though. Hey, my duplicate is taking down just as many. These guys really are losers. They only got ahead because of guns. Yes, they are weak and that means disposable. Hawks mused aloud grimly. Danny seemed to catch on quickly. You mean, they can die in the explosion without any real problem to the more important villains? That's sick. Yes, criminals always live by the survival of the fittest mentality. Quirks are just one of the ways they assert that fittest part, Hawks explained. The Haffa hummed thoughtfully. For ghosts it was true, also, for their kind always vied for superiority in ways similar to this quirk-filled world. Hell, he was a prince precisely because of traditions born out of mentality of the specters. Perhaps that's why competitiveness itself, even the one that led to fighting, was not something inherently vile to his mind. Yet, it was no reason to dispose of the weak in such a manner. On the contrary, it was the duty of the strongest to protect those who were lower on the scale of power, and his core agreed with such a message. Back in the real world, the two heroes made their way to the spacious room that was right below cafeteria. The villains acted predictably. They anticipated that Phantom and Hawks would make their way up, while another duplicate dispatched of the possible reinforcements. While the latter was true, Phantom number 1 simply floated up to the ceiling. "So, I just make it intangible?" he asked. "Will you catch them all in time?" "Trust me, kiddo. Do it." The Haffa put his palms on the ceiling, and in the next second, with shouts of surprise and fright, people started falling from the upper floor. Immediately Hawks threw a myriad of crimson feathers that pinned into the people's clothes and softened their fall. The criminals did not get such luxury. "That's gotta hurt," Hawks mumbled. "Everyone, follow me out of here. Phantom, you watch the back." He then loudly commanded. "On it." Danny saluted as he glanced at the fallen criminals. A couple of small blasts were enough to finally knock them out. He heard some confused whispers among the freed captives, who wondered about why a student was here. The tournament really made him known. Danny flashed them a confident smirk before suddenly the crashing sounds came from the upper floor. The bombs went off, and that explosion sent the entire floor crashing down. The villains tried to prevent the escape at any cost. Phantom wasted no time and quickly summoned the green dome that held everything from collapsing. "Move it." Hawks quickly caught on that they had no time to waste, and the people hurried out of the room. Danny would have let go and followed, if not for the criminals he himself had knocked out. "Great thinking, Phantom." His duplicate returned to him, and that was the first thing he said. "I am you," Phantom holding the rubble responded. "Yep, I am a dumbass. You are one. We both are. We can communicate mentally, and yet we talk like this." Clearly a sign of great intelligence. Danny number 1 gave his clone a dry look. A silent message was finally passed between them, and the free duplicate quickly flew to grab the unconscious villains. He flew towards the exit and left the criminals in the corridor, letting the other duplicate finally let go of the collapsing structure, and, while intangible, flew away as well. He decided to take care of the remaining villains, now that the civilians were in relative safety. But in case the armed men decided to shoot, he had to take care of that also. The other Phantom grabbed the unconscious villains and carried them further, eventually catching up with the group Hawks was leading out. He got some odd looks, but they made it out with relative ease, having taken out some villains beforehand. 1821 Hawks quickly counted. "That's all of them." "Neat," said Phantom, who was now floating upside down near him. "Which of Phantoms are you?" asked the hero. "The handsome one," responded Danny and cackled. "Doesn't matter which one of us is gone. I'll just keep on with my afterlife." "Huh?" Hawks responded, before shaking his head. "We have to scour the building now." "Yeah, already on it." Danny gave a thumbs up. "Oh, you better make a step back." Hawks raised an eyebrow, before out of the window flew another grunt, which Danny picked up from the air with telekinesis. "They have to live, but I don't owe them gentle approach," the Haffa explained and shrugged. Hawks hummed thoughtfully. He was seeing Phantom quickly take out the bad guys out of the broken building, not minding the boy doing the work for him. His feathers had no mind of their own, so the Haffa was better for that task of scouring the damaged building. The fact that the young aspiring hero took time to rescue the criminals without even being given command was admirable to a degree. He made the cut for a noble hero, but the commission had no use for that kind. He would certainly know. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 8. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author RusEmp on FANFICTION.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.